DC Comics superheroes might be some of the most iconic, but not all heroes at DC have power sets that are winners. And even those that do don't always have powers that make sense. Oh boy. When it comes to Power Girl, her powers are odd in the way that they are restricted, let's say, or at least how they used to be restricted. Specifically, we're talking about her power of invulnerability here. She can't be harmed by anything really, because, well, invulnerable, except sometimes natural materials? So I'm pretty sure that, like her Atlantean heritage, which was also a thing at one point in her origins history, seriously, this happened, you can look it up, this restriction and weakness was also retconned out of existence, but there was a time where if Power Girl got into a fight and someone threw a stick or a stone at her hard enough, it could literally break her bones, as this was her one vulnerability. Very strange. What do you think are some just like weird powers in terms of restrictions that exist? Sometimes there are just things that I'm like, but why? I think it says it all when you belong to a team with the words substitute heroes in the title. Dag Wentham is known as Stone Boy, and he belongs to the team known as the Legion of, yes, substitute heroes. He is an alien from the planet Zwen who can transform into a stone form, becoming super strong and durable. Sounds pretty cool, right? But this also immediately makes him, unable to move. Not super useful in combat if you want to, I don't know, do anything other than just survive, I guess. Let me put it another way. Stone Boy has also not been spotted since the New Earth continuity. I think that tells you just how ridiculous his abilities are. So ridiculous that we can't even seem to find a place for him in the massive universe that is the Prime Earth continuity. And this is even after he finally manages to gain some ability in a possible future to move somewhat while in his stone form post 0 hour. Zatanna is one of those characters who can do pretty much anything, but even she has rules that she needs to play by, which make her powers kind of a little weird. Case in point, her powers allow her to cast magical spells, and she can do almost anything with those magical spells. Magic is wild in the sense that, yeah, you can do anything you can really imagine, or anything there's a spell for at least, but at the same time, it's not necessarily something that's easy to do. It has taken, dedication, focus, willpower, years of training, and a natural aptitude for Zatanna to get where she is. And even then, she still has to say all of her spells backwards apparently. Although this might seem like a weird restriction on paper, and yes, you're right, it definitely is. With Zatanna in Justice League Dark, we'd actually learned that the reason that she has to say her spells backwards is because magic, being naturally wild, had to be tamed in some way by rules on Earth. And so that is just one of the rules that was used to prevent it from becoming too chaotic and disrupting the balance in the world. Funny Man is an odd superhero who historically is actually pretty significant, despite how weird he may seem. He's not just powerful for how much of a goofball he is powerful in a historical context, which I think means he deserves a spot here on this list. Funny Man was a creation of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster after they left DC and they began what would become an epic and a long time legal dispute over the rights to Superman. It's very interesting. If you haven't looked into it, highly recommend. A very fascinating part of comic book history. And honestly, rightfully so. They felt they weren't being fairly paid their dues, and we figured that out, and now that's also why they're always credited whenever we talk about Superman. Siegel especially was passionate about getting the rights back. After leaving DC, they reconnected with former DC editor Vin Sullivan, who had started his own comic book company, Magazine Enterprises. Jerry and Joe tried to recreate the magic of Superman, but this time by teaming up to make something entirely different and new. Funny Man. Celebrating their love of comic book pranks and humor, Funny Man was comedian Larry Davis, who after a publicity stunt gone wrong, ends up actually catching a real-life criminal and decides to just become a bona fide superhero, cause why not? Using his jokes and his funny pranks to apprehend and stop criminals. A wacky idea that sadly did not end up panning out in the end, as the character only lasted, sadly, 6 issues. Oh no. Funny Man didn't have any powers, but he was miraculously and comically good at stopping villains with his antics, and sometimes also did this by accident. Elasti Woman. I love Rita Farr. She is just one of the members of DC's Doom Patrol. In the show Doom Patrol, Rita might struggle to utilize and control her powers, still afraid of them and honestly of her appearance while using them, as well as becoming permanently stuck in her creepy elastic form when she uses it. But in the comics, Elasti Woman has actually learned to master these abilities abilities. Rita gained her powers while she was a Hollywood actress and was working on a set in Africa. She was exposed to volcanic gas, which allowed her to change the size of her body and her limbs at will, also having the ability to stretch her limbs out. John Byrne's interpretation of the character was also able to alter the size of objects as well, just by touching them, and the current Primer's continuity version of her also has shape-shifting abilities. I also feel like DC's Doom Patrol television series just does like an amazing job of capturing what shapeshifting or what stretching powers would be like in real life, and how they would actually be really scary, like the whole horror and body dysmorphia aspects that probably would come with that. So if you also haven't watched Doom Patrol, you should go do it. Crazy Jane is a member of the Doom Patrol as well, and honestly that is just a great team to look at if you want to find some superheroes who are quite powerful but also super weird. Jane is no exception to that rule, of course. She's kind of like Marvel's Legion, who actually appeared only a few years before Jane made her debut over at DC Comics, first appearing in Doom Patrol issue number 19 in the 1987 series created by comic book writing legend Grant Morrison and masterful artist Richard Case. Crazy Jane is Kay Chalice, who within her has at least 64 personalities, each with their own personas and their own power sets. The challenging thing is that Jane often struggles to find balance with the various personalities residing within her and has demonstrated various levels of control over them. Wildcat initially was boxer Ted Grant, who didn't actually have any superpowers, but instead had amazing fighting prowess. However, over time, as sometimes does happen, he would also gain powers via, well, a curse. It doesn't even sound like a curse based on actually what it did for him. It gave him resurrection powers, but with a weird, oddly thematically fitting limit in regards to his number of lives. He only gets 9 because he's a cat. Get it? He only has 9 lives. Probably one of the strangest but also most powerful heroes out there, honestly, is Metamorpho. Metamorpho made his first appearance back in 1965 in The Brave and the Bold issue number 57 and has also been known as the Element Man in the comics. He has a very unique and interesting power set that allows him to transform his body or his body parts into any element. This also gives him a pretty unique look as well. Metamorpho isn't the only hero to exhibit these powers though, and at one point we also had Element Girl. The story ended up being quite dark in the end, very bleak actually. But before Sandman happened, she did assist Metamorpho on some of his adventures. Both Element Man and Element Girl are believed to be agents of the Egyptian sun god Ra, Amun-Ra. He created beings that apparently were known as metamorphae, and that's apparently what they are. Aquaman is an interesting character. Oftentimes he is considered to be one of the weakest members of the Justice League, and is often, I would say, the butt of many DC Comics fans' jokes. Maybe a little less now that Jason Momoa was Aquaman recently, but still, at the end of the day, that is a thing that did happen, and I would actually say that Aquaman, when you think about it though, is actually pretty nuts when it comes to his power set, at least in the modern day. I feel like the fact that we used to make fun of him so much seems goofy. Although if we go back, I guess, to some of the more old school rules when it comes to his power set, maybe it is easier to see why so many people considered him kind of weak in comparison to his fellow heroes on the Justice League. One restriction that was pretty weird was that because Aquaman was from Atlantis, he actually needed to be dipped in water periodically, or he would literally dry out, making him useless and putting him in great danger if he was away from water too long. He literally became a fish out of water. However, in the water, very powerful. Now just pretty much powerful all the time, I think. Arm Fall Off Boy has to be one of the weirdest ones out there. Unlike another odd hero, Bouncing Boy, who eventually in the Primer's continuity did achieve his dream, Arm Fall Off Boy has never made the cut for the Legion of Superheroes. Sad. And that is saying something, considering that the Legion of Superheroes themselves are a pretty weird superhero team by all definitions. Arm Fall Off Boy has the power to detach his limbs, which he typically then attempts to use to beat his enemies with. And I mean, it is pretty cool that he can like remove his limbs and survive that, but it's also less cool that really all he does from there is like use his arm or his leg as a weapon. Especially as this means now he has like less limbs to actually move around with and use in combat. It's really pretty silly. And so is the onomatopoeia that often is used to describe the sound of his power, which I love. It is plorp. So satisfying, but also very disturbing to read on a page when someone removes their arm. Plorp.
Dead Girl was a mutant with light blue skin, spooky powers, and dreams of fame. Though she appeared regularly throughout the end of X-Force's original run and its continuation, X-Statix, she was constantly overshadowed by her teammates. I can't think of a better way to prepare for Halloween than by chatting about this girlie. Dead Girl first appeared in X-Force 125 in 2002. X-Force members Orphan, You-Go Girl, and Anarchist went to a graveyard to officially recruit Dead Girl into their ranks. Like a good undead character, Rather, she arrived at her first mission wearing tattered clothes and a rope for a belt, so undead casual. However, it was suggested that she was purposely trying to scare her teammates. Though she recounted her past for the team, Dead Girl did not tell them her real name. When Dead Girl was alive, she was an aspiring actor but fell in love with a man who eventually took her life. Her mutant powers manifested when, after the passing, she regained consciousness in a cemetery and realized that she could communicate with her dead cohabitants. The spirits lured the life taker back to the cemetery for her, so Dead Girl pulled him into her grave and made a mattress out of his bones, which is so iconic. While an excellent tale of revenge, much of Dead Girl's origin was still shrouded in mystery. Though she was accepted into X-Force, not even Dead Girl knew the full extent of her powers. She found out quickly, however, that when her body was blown to bits, she could slowly and grossly reform. Dead Girl could also control her dismembered limbs as she choked an enemy with a detached arm. This mutant was creepy and gross and awesome. It was if she came directly from a horror movie into a comic book. The New Mutants had one of the wackiest adventures in superhero history, even by X-Men standards, and the core of those stories from the beginning was Danielle Moonstar. Known as the mutant Mirage, Dani's powers started out simple enough, if a little mystical and ill-defined, but over the course of her history they would develop, change completely, be lost altogether, and join new powers that had nothing to do with her being a mutant. Starting out as an orphaned girl living on a reservation with her grandfather, Dani experienced precognitive visions of the future and a psychic connection to the animals around her, but her primary power proved to be the ability to craft illusions embodying the fears of those around her that seemed terrifyingly real. While her psychic connection with animals came in handy alongside her teammate Wolfsbane, who could assume a lupine form, Dani took the name Mirage and honed her ability to craft illusions as her primary weapon. Doreen Green, aka Squirrel Girl, is not a typical superhero. She has a unique ability to communicate with squirrels and possesses the agility and strength of her rodent friends. Her seemingly bizarre powers have made her the subject of many jokes, but don't underestimate her. Squirrel Girl has repeatedly proven she's a force to be reckoned with. She has defeated some of the Marvel Universe's most powerful villains, including Thanos. Her unconventional tactics and problem-solving skills have earned her a dedicated fanbase and a reputation as one of Marvel's most enduring and compelling heroes. The world's smartest person with a huge red dinosaur for an ally couldn't be better. Young superhero Luna Lafayette, aka Moon Girl. With her array of gadgets, her bizarre inhuman ability, and her vast intelligence, Moon Girl has the brains to outsmart just about anyone. Primarily aided by her genius-level intelligence when fighting bad guys, Lunella is the smartest person in the world despite her youth. The 10-story tall beast called Devil Dinosaur assists Lunella in battle. Devil Dinosaur possesses human-level intelligence, sharp claws, and a vicious bite, making him a formidable ally. Moon Girl's inhuman ability allows her to swap minds with Devil Dinosaur, but it's not entirely within her control. Several things can trigger the mind swap, such as stress, anger, or hunger. Additionally, they will spontaneously switch brains during the full moon lunar phase. Lunella carries a variety of tools and gadgets invented by herself to aid her heroic pursuits. These devices include a spring-loaded boxing glove and a taser, all bizarre but certainly functional. Every Marvel fan knows the Avengers, but aside from that main team though, there are several other superhero teams that use the word Avengers, and not all of them are so great. The Great Lakes Avengers especially are a team focused primarily on like outsiders and D-list heroes. Big Bertha is one of the most controversial members of this team. In her civilian life, she's a model, Ashley Crawford, but when she wants to, or has to, she can transform into a very obese woman, which didn't sit well with some readers, especially because other characters often make fun of Big Bertha because of her appearance. The good news here is that Big Bertha is incredibly strong and can easily squish a lot of her opponents, and since she looks different in her civilian life, her superhero identity is a well-protected secret. Unlike other superheroes who out themselves to the public and then severely regret it later, such as Spider-Man during the Civil War storyline, still there are a lot of Marvel heroes who are super strong without the need to transform in such a way, which makes Ashley's power one of the strangest ones. Spring Heel Jack, also known as just Jack, possesses the extraordinary ability to leap great distances thanks to his incredibly powerful legs. While this power may appear unremarkable compared to some other superheroes, Jack has used his leaping abilities to significantly take down some of the most formidable villains in the entire DC universe. Despite being a lesser-known hero, Jack's acrobatic skills and unparalleled agility have proven valuable assets in combat, allowing him to evade attacks and strike from unexpected angles. With his unique power and impressive combat skills, Spring-Heeled Jack is a hero not to be underestimated. Dog Welder, aka also a Jack, is one of the most bizarre superheroes with a disturbing and intriguing ability. As the name suggests, his power involves welding dead dogs to people's faces, which is not for the faint of heart. Despite the grotesque nature of his power, Dog Welder has used it effectively to take down criminals and other villains, making him a valuable asset to his team. While his methods may seem extreme, his dedication to justice cannot be denied, and he is a reminder that even the weirdest powers can be used for good. Johnny D has my least favorite mutation that I've ever seen, and also the strangest mutation I've ever seen, a sentient maw attached to him. It's right in the middle of his chest, and Johnny has named it the Freak. The Freak produces voodoo dolls. To get a doll, Johnny must feed the maw a DNA sample, like hair. The maw will spit out the doll, and Johnny will get full, absolute control over that person. Now, I'm sure that getting people's DNA is probably really annoying, but once you have it and you have the doll, there is nothing Johnny can't do. As it stands, there isn't anyone that he can't control if he has their doll. There is a theory that Johnny is not the mutant, but that the maw is the mutant, and that it's just attached to a normal Johnny. The Freak does have its own brain, so it's a very real possibility, but they're literally attached, so Johnny, mutant or not, you might as well be. Johnny happened to be one of the only mutants to keep his mutation after M-Day, and can I just say, I would be so mad. Imagine learning that hundreds of mutants lost their powers, but you were still stuck with your chest maw, a chest maw that once tried to hurt you. That would be the start of my villain arc. Personally, Johnny is stronger than me. Jack Hawksmore can either be the most powerful hero on the battlefield or the weakest, and it depends entirely on one odd factor: the size of the city he's in. Hawksmore of the Wildstorm universe experiences a symbiotic link with whatever city he's in. The bigger the city, the more powerful he is. In fact, if Jack were to exist outside a large urban center for long, he would literally pass away, so it's imperative that he lives somewhere like New York. The reason Hawksmore is like this is because time-traveling scientists used him as a lab rat, and he is now more alien organs and foreign objects than human. Jack's city-sanctioned powers are the stuff that you would usually see, like enhanced senses, the ability to stick to walls and also phase himself and others through walls, sometimes fatally to his enemy. Then he also has traditional superpowers with like a city spin on them, like he's capable of telepathy, but with buildings. He can also go up to a window or a mirror and see everything it has seen, almost like it's a personal security camera. He also uses windows and mirrors as a form of teleportation, stepping into one and out another. One time in Jenny Sparks' The Secret History of the Authority, Jack literally turned the entire city of Tokyo into a giant battle suit to fight Kansas City, which also gained sentience for some reason. A final fun bit about Jack's powers is whatever city he's in, he speaks every language spoken in that city, and that is pretty powerful in itself.
For example, we got Rainbow Girl. The Legion of Superheroes seems to just be a sticky flytrap for all the random and wacky superheroes out in the universe. Unlike a lot of others, Rainbow Girl didn't actually make it onto that team as her powers were deemed not useful enough. She just tried out, got rejected, and instead she made it onto the Legion of Substitute Heroes, which I'm assuming is the Legion that villains either don't listen to or the Legion that just puts on a movie for villains instead of fighting them. Rainbow Girl can harness the whole emotional spectrum: red for rage, orange for green, yellow for fear, green for will, blue for hope, indigo for compassion, and violet for love. But unlike the lanterns of each of those different emotional colors, Rainbow Girl has no ring to use the power through. She can just kinda do it. The problem is she just cycles through the colors impulsively, leading to terrible mood swings. Not only was this incredibly offensive, having a female hero whose main thing is awful mood swings, but it kind of makes, like, no sense. There is no real explanation for why her powers are the way they are, and there's no explanation for why she has mood swings or how she even uses her powers with no lantern ring to do the stuff that the rings do. Now, Wally West is easily the fastest of all the speedsters out there. He has an almost spiritual connection to the Speed Force that allows him to do a great number of things, like traveling through time to creating electrical energy constructs. Thanks to a heart condition of all things, Wally has even been able to freeze time, which basically allows him to move at super speed without actually moving at super speed. And if you can explain to me exactly how that works, then I'll give you $1 single, because that's probably all I have. Now, the Speed Force Force is basically time, the representation of reality in motion, being the very cosmic force that pushes space and time forward. So how is it that people like Wally can hold chunks of it, create lightning constructs with it, absorb speed and momentum from people or things? As a concept for time, a cosmic force, it is really hard to both wrap your head around and explain the Speed Force and all the things that speedsters like Wally West and Barry Allen are able to do with it. You kinda just have to accept it for what it is. Sorry. Alec Holland was a scientist who created a restorative growth formula before being doused in the chemical by gangsters and set on fire. He jumped into a nearby swamp and was reborn as the Swamp Thing. Eventually, it was revealed that Alec Holland had actually passed away that night, and the creature that emerged from the swamp was a humanoid plant elemental creature with Alex's memories. Regardless, the Swamp Thing is basically a god. An earth elemental and avatar of the green, essentially a god of plants with unimaginable levels of superhuman strength, durability, and inability to feel pain. He can regenerate from plant life, he can move at the speed of light, alter his size drastically, shapeshift to grant himself abilities like flight and duplication, he has control over plants which allows him to teleport through plant life as well, and thanks to his connection to the green, he can even move through time, and possesses cosmic awareness, and he can even possess other humans, all from a restorative growth formula, a fire, and jumping into a swamp. Now, a whole lot of superheroes have similar origin stories, and I mean, let's be honest, how many different ways can you realistically come up with for someone to gain superpowers that actually make sense? Not a lot, I bet. Lots of superheroes have created the source of their own powers with science. Hourman was the first example of this in the DC universe. Rex Tyler created the Miraclo pill that gave him superhuman strength and durability for an hour each day. Just 1 hour. The fact that it only works for an hour is just odd on its own. Was that the limit of what he was able to do? How did he make that a trait of a pill? Why does it take exactly 60 minutes for the pill to wear off? How does it boost strength and hardness of his skin? What happens to the extra mass? Why didn't he just modify it to always work, if not by himself, then by using other people's research? Why was it physically addictive? I have questions, Hourman, and it may take more than an hour for you to answer them, so I hope that's okay. Some of our heroes' powers really only come to light or become useful in very specific situations, and some literally only appear in key events, never to be seen again. For Justice League founding member Aquaman, an example of that kind of power came during the Brightest Day crossover event which followed the awesome Blackest Night. In Blackest Night, Aquaman was one of a bunch of heroes and villains that were resurrected from the underworld to become members of the Black Lantern Corps. After their defeat, the remaining heroes and villains who returned to the land of the living had to now find their purpose. Aquaman was returned with the purpose of both saving Aqualad and preventing a war between Atlantis and Zabel. Now, Arthur found that since he was resurrected to serve as a member of the Black Lantern Corps, he was now able to summon undead sea life to come to his aid. Trust me when I say that it is much cooler than you might expect. I guess if you kind of suspend reality a little bit, it can sort of make sense, but is he resurrecting that sea life? Is he just controlling their lifeless bodies? When Aquaman controls fish, I thought it was like a telepathic thing, but now I'm kind of thinking that he's just forcing their little fish bodies telekinetically to do what he wants, which is creepy. Beast Boy is the comedic relief of the Teen Titans. His ability to transform into animals is perfect for jokes and for their awesome battles, but because he is a bit of a silly little guy, I feel like DC kind of decided that how he got his powers and why they are the way they are just doesn't really need a ton of explanation. Beast Boy gained his powers from what his wiki describes as, and I'm not joking, an unspecified incident. Another origin says that he gained his powers through a blood transfusion from a green monkey and gained the ability to change into any type of animal. Now, shapeshifting is a power that doesn't really make sense at all. Like, where does the extra mass come from or go to when they shapeshift? That's one that applies to all shapeshifters, but for Beast Boy, why does he only turn into animals? What keeps him from shapeshifting into humans? Now, it will be explained that his shapeshifting is a part of his connection to the mystical force known as the Red, but other characters that are connected to the Red simply use the abilities of other animals. I love Beast Boy, so whatever, but but it's still kinda weird. First ever appearing in the back pages of the very first issue of Sensation Comics of 1942, which also contained the premiere of Wonder Woman, the original Mr. Terrific, and the Atom, Ted Grant is one of the world's best hand-to-hand fighters, particularly when it comes to boxing, being the one to train several other DC fighters, including Batman. Ted's dad, Henry Grant, had taught and trained him so well that Ted became a Wildcat in the ring. He eventually goes on to become a superhero named Wildcat. Cool, love it, simple. Wait, what do you mean that he gained 9 lives? So basically, while Ted spent a good chunk of his career technically powerless, eventually Wildcat was cursed by King Inferno and Zatara. You gotta love when curses actually are more like blessings though. Zatara's curse halted Ted's aging process and gave him an extra 9 lives, like this is a video game or something. It's a pretty neat curse to be able to pull off, and in fact it's so good it kinda makes you wonder why Zatara wouldn't just give it to himself or his loved ones. Next up, it's Hawkman, just the whole character. His origins have changed many different times over the character's comic book existence. In his original 1940 origin, he is Egyptian royalty who has been reincarnated throughout time as a variety of different heroes before eventually becoming the archaeologist Carter Hall. When he was reintroduced in 1961, he was now an alien cop from the planet Thanagar named Qatar Hole, who comes to Earth and takes on the secret identity of Carter Hall. 2 years later, we learned that these two different versions are actually multiversal variants of each other, with the alien living on Earth 1 and the original being on Earth 2. Then in 1986, the Crisis on Infinite Earths happens and all the worlds are combined into one, so these two people were now both Hawkman at different points in history, with the original operating in the 40s and the alien operating in the 80s. In 1994's Zero Hour, these two become just one person. Then in 2011, Hawkman is, and always has been, a space cop from Thanagar. And then in 2017, Carter Hall was now a pharaoh who reincarnates because the knife that he was hard deleted with in ancient Egypt was made of nth metal from a Thanagarian ship. And then finally in 2018, it's decided that he can just reincarnate not just on Earth, but on different planets as well. And all of his powers are because of that nth metal, which itself makes no sense. Ronnie Raymond was a jock in high school who was also, funnily enough, also an environmentalist. When Ronnie showed up to protest the opening of a new nuclear power plant, he met Dr. Martin Stein, a Nobel Prize winning physicist who worked there. When the Firestorm Matrix reactor malfunctioned thanks to one of Ronnie's compadres, Stein and Raymond were both caught in the radioactive aftermath and somehow found themselves fused together into Firestorm, the nuclear man. Now, the two men are a being with two minds sharing the same body, usually with Raymond taking the lead. Alongside the rather unique one man with two minds thing, Firestorm also gained the ability to transmute any non-organic matter, having complete control over molecules. With this ability, he can do many things that honestly don't make a ton of sense. While regeneration, self-sustenance, density manipulation, shapeshifting, and all that makes sense given his molecular abilities, where it starts to fall apart for me personally is being able to walk through walls, because it's not like he's making his molecules intangible. He also has nuclear powers, which feels kind of unnecessary, and there's a few more things he can do that just push the boundary just a tiny bit. He's an incredibly powerful all-around character, but I think DC did him a disservice by making him kind of able to do anything at all and explaining it away as an added benefit of the accident that made him. Or them. Or him. I'm gonna go with him. And last up today, Superman has gone through a lot of changes during his time in DC Comics. While we now know what his powers are, and they rarely change except for when they get like augmented or there's some kind of solar radiation ability, when he first showed up, his powers were still being developed by DC, and he went from being strong enough to pick up a car, leaping 1/8 of a mile, outrunning an express train and being mostly bulletproof, to flying faster than light, having enhanced strength, developing super hearing, x-ray vision, telescopic vision, heat vision, and being able to withstand an atomic blast. It was when we got to the Silver Age though that writers kind of started to run out of challenges for the character. So they started to create stories where the character would develop a new, very specific power that he would have for just one issue and it would almost never be seen again. Unsurprisingly, that on its own makes no sense. But sometimes the powers themselves made even less sense. For example, some of the one-issue powers Superman was granted included, and I'm not joking, super ventriloquism, super weaving, super hypnosis, and shooting literal tiny action figure-sized doppelgang versions of himself out of his hands that would fight crime as well. This is a guy who has dragged tons of planets all connected by a chain, so I guess there's really no point in trying to explain anything about Superman and what he can and can't do. Now we're starting off this list a little weird and talking about Hawkeye. Clint Barton is essentially just a regular human man, but despite that, he's considered a power level 4 according to Nick Fury's intel. This is due to his incredible level of skill and ability. Hawkeye is a master of archery and the use of regular bows, longbows, compound bows, and crossbows, with basically perfect accuracy, able to fire multiple arrows at a single target in a few seconds, hitting multiple targets in a few quick strokes, and directly hitting small targets in the greatest of distances, but he also has near perfect precision with any aimed or thrown weapon. He is at the peak level of human eyesight possible. He is in peak athletic human condition with peak strength, endurance, and reflexes. He is an expert acrobat, tactician, and master martial artist. And it's seemingly all from just practice and training really hard. To show you how ridiculous this is, in Avengers Volume 3 number 14, Hawkeye was cornered by about 17 marksmen and he took them all down without taking a single life. In Hawkeye Volume 4 number 1, Clint ran into a wanted criminal in a bar and he took him down completely silently by, get this, fracturing his neck with a deck of cards. And last but not least, you know that Winter Soldier scene from the MCU with Captain America taking out all those dudes in an elevator? Hawkeye did the same thing in Volume 2 number 3 of his own comic, and that was way before Cap, who is a super soldier, I will remind you, got the credit. The mutant and original X-Man, Forget-Me-Not, might be a case of people judging a book by its cover, because he doesn't really look too menacing if we're being honest. And to be fair, his powers do also sound pretty lame at face value. Basically, this mutant can't be remembered by anyone, and sometimes anything he meets as soon as he's out of sight. And as sad as this must be for him in his personal life, Forget-Me-Not can use this power to his advantage in huge ways in the right circumstances. In one case, he's even able to dupe all of X-Force when the team has to form an elaborate plan just to track him down. They're only able to finally catch him by having Dr. Nemesis record himself explaining to the team the existence of Forget-Me-Not as they search for him. The only caveat to this whole tedious process is that the maintenance bots, along with, I'm assuming, any computer automated system, can actually remember Forget-Me-Not if it doesn't get glitched out, which sort of weakens the potential of his powers. But again, don't be fooled. You know when the X-Men seem to just miraculously figure out a secret or a previously unknown way to defeat an almost unbeatable opponent? 90% of the time, that's just Forget-Me-Not, and the X-Men just forget him but not the information that he gives to them. Now, Nina Thurman is a mutant weapons expert and mercenary under the name Domino. She was introduced in the early 90s as a member of X-Force. Now, Domino is the survivor of a bunch of unethical scientists who are trying to create the perfect weapon. It's the tale as old as time, really, but this means Domino has all the talents and skills you would expect of an expert mercenary or secret agent. But we're here to talk about powers, and Domino's are unique to say the least. Domino has probability manipulation powers, meaning she's almost always lucky. She exudes at all times a subconsciously activated field that alters the probability of occurrences in her line of sight into her favor. This means that whenever she is stressed, excited, or focused on something, things will probably go well for her, and quite poorly for her opponents. Now, there is a caveat to this. She needs to actively be trying to help herself for her powers to work. So, like, if debris is falling from the sky and was about to hit her in the head, she would still be hurt if she stood still. However, if she tried to avoid them, she would move perfectly to avoid each and every piece about to hit her. Now, the full potential of Domino's abilities hasn't actually been fully realized as of yet, and Marvel has a knack for updating powers whenever they want, but with an ability to be lucky, there's only a finite amount of things you cannot do. Now, while the powers of Domino are still fresh in your minds, this is a perfect opportunity to talk about Iska the Unbeaten. Iska also has a form of limited psychokinesis, which is probability manipulation, or known as the power of luck, which is probably one of the most unexplainable powers because we can't even really say that luck is for sure a real thing. But Iska takes it one step further than Domino into ridiculousness with the power of being literally unable to lose. Iska has the power to always win, no matter what. Whether that is in individual one-on-one contests, votes, wagers, or even just larger battles where she's a member of a group. In contests of skill, her powers might give her the talent she needs to win, or she might just win through improbable circumstances, quote unquote. In larger battles or even wars, her powers detect the probability of both sides winning and have literally led her to defect from the losing side and join the winning side, meaning she still personally wins. It's not that we don't necessarily understand it. I mean, I don't understand it. It's just that it can't even properly be explained without sounding just ridiculous. I love her though. I love that character. Next up, the Inhuman known as Reader has a very fitting name, as he possesses the really cool ability to make whatever he reads actually real, which if you think about it should be practically impossible and is also a truly incredible power. Reader is a part of a group of Madelyne Inhumans who live on Earth that call themselves the Lore. Now, because of Reader's potentially immense power, the people of the Lore tribe took his eyes out, making him unable to actually read things. On top of this, Reader has mental blocks in place that stop him from accidentally rewriting reality by reading the wrong things. Now, how does he still read with no eyes? The same way blind people do. Braille. Reader carries around Braille cards that have single words on them that allow him to do different things in combat and in given situations. For example, he has a card that says see in Braille that, when read, allows him to see through the eyes of other people. Or the back and freeze cards, which allow him to go back in time or pause time respectively. He basically has reality warping powers, but he does have a weakness in the form of only being able to use 3 words a day that gradually become less and less powerful, which is quite the nerf, but it also makes the whole this makes no sense thing even stronger. Christina Anderson has an ability that quite a few characters in comic books have. That would be the ability to shrink. Thumbelina can reduce herself down to about 1/4 of an inch tall. Now that ability is perfectly fine in my eyes. Like I said, lots of characters can do this. My problem with Thumbelina, and also some other shrinkers, is how the heck do they retain their full size strength when they get smaller? Or, in Thumbelina's case, how does she get stronger when she shrinks? I'm sorry to try and bring physics into any debate about superheroes and their various powers, but it makes absolutely no sense in the laws of physics that someone who is smaller can be more strong than when they were the regular size. Ants, for example, if they were the size of a person, they would be insanely strong, as they are able to carry 20 times their body weight. So that's like an average human being able to carry a small SUV. But since ants are so small, that means they can carry like a leaf. Thumbelina should not be able to knock someone out when she is 1/4 of an inch tall. I'm sorry, it just shouldn't make sense. Speaking of which, Robbie Rodriguez, who goes by El Guapo, is a mutant from the Marvel Universe, but that kind of opens up a whole bunch of questions, because Robbie doesn't seem to have any powers of his own, unless you consider his symbiotic relationship with a flying skateboard a superpower. His wiki page refers to this as idiosyncratic manipulation, suggesting that Robbie actually has total control over his skateboard, but the problem with that is that his skateboard has also acted of its own accord, like when it beat him up for cheating on his girlfriend. Now, an argument could be made that perhaps that's his own subconscious beating himself up for doing the wrong thing, but that's just a me theory, and Marvel did not state this to be true at all, or really even explain his ability in any way, shape, or form. It's not telekinesis, and the board seems to have a mind of its own. You explain it to me, because I can't. Adam Naramani, or Adam X, was a genetically created hybrid of both Emperor Deken of the Shi'ar Empire and Catherine Summers from Earth, created in an attempt to introduce more genealogies to the Shi'ar Empire. Now, just as his origin is unique, so are his powers. Adam has the ability of electrokinetic hemopyrokinesis, or if you don't want to have a stroke, you can say sanguine combustion, which also sounds super cool. It basically means that he can send an electric surge through oxygenated blood, which leads to ignition of the electrolytes present in the blood, causing a person to burn from the inside out, which could result in a little subtle warming effect, which is lovely, or it could completely disintegrate a person, so there's a lot of wiggle room here. But thanks to his Shi'ar side of things, he also has enhanced strength, agility, reflexes, stamina, speed, vision, and healing. You couple all that with his awesome fighting skill and the cool cybernetic retractable claws, and he's just someone you don't want to mess with, but also he can set fire to your blood. In our runner-up spot today, Chamber, or Jonathan Evans Starsmore, discovered his powers when a blast of psionic energy just literally burst from his torso and destroyed much of his chest and face. It turns out that Chamber is literally composed of that same psionic energy, with his body just acting as a shell for it. When his powers burst out of him, the wound was replaced by a constant glow of psionic fire, leaving him unable to speak. Instead, he can only communicate telepathically. Additionally, he doesn't eat, drink, or even breathe, as he has literally no organs. It's just energy inside of him all the time. Chamber constantly created and unleashed psionic charges of energy that could strike with volatile force, being projected as a blast from his chest, a series of guided streams that struck specific targets, or as a massive eruption striking in all directions. If he was given the time to train properly, Chamber could have potentially been one of the most powerful mutants to walk the earth, but his powers make no sense. Okay, so many Inhumans have incredibly unique and awesome powers. Only Karnak's ability isn't so much a superpower as it is a learned skill, kind of like Hawkeye. Karnak never went through the process of Terrigenesis, which would have activated his Inhuman gene and given him actual powers. Since he never went through this process, he has all the enhancements of a regular Inhuman, including super strength, speed, stamina, and durability. But unlike other Inhumans, Karnak has trained himself to be an extremely powerful martial artist, and beyond that, he developed an incredibly powerful trait of being able to sense weak points, fracture planes, and stress points in enemies, objects, plans, arguments, and anything really, including concepts. Obviously, in combat, he can use this alongside his martial skills to defeat opponents even more quickly, but the applications outside of combat are incredibly useful as well. For an example, just one example because that's really all I need, he found a weakness in death itself and was able to bring himself back to life, which you just win at that point, man. You're just done. Alan Scott is the original Green Lantern, the original powerhouse of the Justice Society, and he is the most unique of the human heroes to gain the Green Lantern title, in my opinion. Alan's ring is unique as it is powered by the Starheart, a repository of magical energy made by the Guardians of the Universe. This allows him to do things like releasing eldritch blasts. His ring also has an inexplicable vulnerability to wood, but for me, what makes Alan Scott a little extra weird is that his ring transformed him into an energy being. Alan Scott absorbed the Starheart into himself after years of using it, basically becoming it himself. Unfortunately, this raises a lot of questions. How did it turn him into energy? He internalized the power source, but that shouldn't have made him energy. How does he get hurt when his corporeal form is now just his own concept of who he is? He should just now be completely invincible, but that doesn't seem to be the case. As a being of energy, he can kind of just make the rules whatever he wants them to be, and I guess the rules are that he can get hurt. Now, despite his incredibly confusing continuity, Hawkman and Hawkgirl are both characters I have always thought were just kinda super cool. I mean, look at them and those giant wings. It's awesome, but it's actually not the wings that allows them to fly. Hawkman actually achieves lift and actually most of his powers thanks to his nth metal belt and boots. Nth metal has psychoreactive electromagnetic and gravitational properties, so when he wills it, the nth metal will use anti-gravity to grant him lift. The wings then provide the thrust and the maneuverability. Where it gets weird is how the nth metal provides his other powers, notably super strength, super durability, super vision, and a healing factor. Gravitational properties could totally help him with the super strength, allowing him to probably negate an object's mass. Sure, but I can't really think of any way to explain the durability, which usually accompanies strength, the super vision, and most of all, the healing factor. All of those abilities are gained from his nth metal, but it makes no sense. Now, many a time have I spoken about Elongated Man, who somehow managed to gain his abilities by consuming a certain fruit. His origin is pretty ridiculous, but when it comes to stretching heroes, only one has really gone to the point of making absolutely no sense, and his name is Plastic Man. Plastic Man is known to the nerdy community for being one of the most surprisingly powerful superheroes DC Comics has. After being exposed to unknown chemicals, Plastic Man gained the ability to manipulate his own body on a molecular level, meaning he has complete control over its shape, size, and density. He's able to alter his size, which I'm not even going to go into that, but he's also been able to stretch his limbs, transform into other people or objects, allowing him to do things like fly and increase his strength. He's practically invulnerable and immortal and can regenerate if he does get hurt. That is all fine. Where it goes completely off the rails is when this guy turns himself into things like a working aeroplane and a space rocket. So now he can just change the actual chemical makeup of his body, produce fuel, and create combustion? Nah. Next up, Martian Manhunter is one of my actual favorite superheroes. He's super cool. He's so, how you say, mysterious. Just like some of his powers. Martian Manhunter is like a Swiss army knife. He's super strong and durable on the level of Superman. He can fly, he has shape-shifting powers, which also somehow allows him to increase or decrease his size, which irks me to no degree. He has some of the strongest telepathy on the entire planet, and while still being super durable and strong, he can also be completely intangible. He can fire extremely powerful beams of mysterious energy out of his eyes that are pretty much the same as Superman's, except not powered by the sun, and we have no idea where that amount of energy is actually coming from. And while also having all those other abilities, he can also go completely invisible. Not just blending into the background, but legit invisible. I love him because of how powerful he is while also having his personality, but sometimes it feels like he was just given powers to make him a backup Superman. So as most fans of DC Comics know, Kryptonians are wildly powerful. Superman and his entire race are godlike aliens who have a very limited number of weaknesses. Most Kryptonians are similar in other universes as well. Superman's cousin Supergirl is entirely the same when it comes to her powers and weaknesses, if not on different levels based on experience and all that jazz. But Supergirl has a multiversal counterpart in the form of Power Girl, who is basically the exact same person but from Earth 2. But for some reason, this Kryptonian from Earth 2 has all her invulnerabilities reduced to nothing in the face of a pointy enough twig. It was revealed that Power Girl is vulnerable to raw, unprocessed materials, meaning she is vulnerable to both wood and rocks. Do you hear how ridiculous that is? Raw, unprocessed materials make up almost the entire natural world. The weirdest thing about this is that no other Kryptonians from Earth 2 share this weakness. It's just Power Girl, and it didn't even last forever. Next up is Metamorpho. Metamorpho is an elemental superhero with the power to transmute his body into various forms using different periodic elements that were found in the human body. Now, originally known as the archaeologist Rex Mason, he was exposed to the Orb of Ra in Egypt, and it changed him into one of the mythical metamorphi. That, or he was exposed to the energy of an ancient meteorite. Either one. So yeah, his powers are mostly mythical and somewhat magical, which makes arguing with them in any way kinda pointless, but that's never stopped me before. Now, when he first appeared, Metamorpho was only able to change his body into and use elements that were already found within the human body. And if anything is going to make sense, then that is probably the thing that does make sense. But what's weird is that a part of Metamorpho's body managed to separate and form a duplicate of Metamorpho, and it started calling itself Rufus, aka Shift. For some reason, Shift could manipulate all elements, not just the ones inside the human body, and eventually, when Metamorpho reabsorbed Shift into himself, he also gained that power boost. That is the problem I have with Metamorpho, not the endless list of other things that he can do. Next up, the Red Bee isn't particularly outstanding. Rick Rowley is just a guy in a suit who fights crime, usually with a stinger ray which he can effectively use against enemies. That is what it is. Can't argue with it. A dude in a suit with a taser. Cool. What is outstanding to the point of being almost completely unbelievable is that Red Bee has figured out how to train bees. Red Bee can use his favorite bee, who is named Michael, for spying and infiltration, but he was also said to have trained many other bees other than Michael. It's just that Michael is the only truly talented of his bees who has also learned or developed the ability to use his stinger multiple times without tearing his own body apart and going to bee heaven. Rick can find another genius bee to replace Michael if Michael expires. There is no further explanation, and I personally don't need one. Sounds pretty self-explanatory to me. Training bees. Now, Friendly Fire is a member of the superhero group called the All-Star Section 8. He has the power to project energy blasts from his fists. That's cool. At least maybe it would be if he was anyone else, but he is Friendly Fire, and Friendly Fire is a special case. It may be kind of redundant to say that his ability makes no sense because, yeah, he is kind of a joke character, but Friendly Fire never hits his intended target with any of his attacks, and what's worse is that no matter how hard he tries, he always accidentally hits innocent people, and more often than not, specifically his friends and allies. What's crazy is that even when he really tried, he still managed to not only blow off his own head, like straight up, but he even managed to still hit his own ally, Defenestrator. The question I like to ask myself is if this is actually an accident. Is this just gross negligence? Is he really just that bad at aiming, or is this an actual legit byproduct of his power? Does his power actually force him to never hit his target? Am I asking a pointless question? Yes, but you asked for this. Or maybe you didn't. I don't know. If you want to talk about heroes that are just completely wacky and nonsensical, we don't need to look any further than the Doom Patrol. And for our runner-up spot, we're looking at Danny the Street, a living sentient street who can teleport to any city in the world. He was first introduced in Doom Patrol Volume 2 number 35 in 1990, and his main purpose and drive in this world is to bring happiness to those who inhabit whatever city he is currently set up in, giving those who have nowhere to go a place to rest their heads. Now, I want it to be known that I love Danny. He is incredibly wholesome. He likes to cross-dress and dress himself in a nice pink frilly decorations on some of his buildings. He can communicate through signs and billboards, but he cannot actually speak himself. He eventually became the headquarters of Doom Patrol, and at one point he grew to be Danny the World, which was an entire planet, yes, and then at another point he was deconstructed down to Danny the Brick. And one time he was even just the humble Danny the Alley. Do I even need to say why this makes no sense? I don't think I do. And finally, are your superpowers not making any sense? Well, I have an easy fix for you. Just tag on the word mystery and that should solve your problems. I'm assuming that's what Flex Mentallo did when he described his superpower of muscle mystery. Flex here has the absolutely insane ability to manipulate reality in a whole handful of ways simply by flexing different muscles. Now, I'm not going to argue with this much. For starters, Flex was created from a drawing. That's how he came into reality, so there is really no basis for me to even start to justify anything about him and his abilities. By flexing different muscles, Flex can do some relatively normal superhero things like gaining super strength, durability, and all that jazz, but he can also flex muscles in order to, I don't know, survive and travel in the vacuum of space, or fly, or travel dimensions, or create energy constructs, or control his own pheromones, or control people's minds, or see the future, or even use telepathy and telekinesis, and you just kinda have to accept it, because that's the way it is.
There are a lot of shapeshifters out there, but there are none that are quite like Ice Cream. Ice Cream is a mutant whose abilities allow him to turn into ice cream. That's it. That's what he can do. He was once a villain who was jealous of the X-Men and sought to take them down because their powers were a lot cooler than his. He felt that the X-Men made him look bad, running around doing cool stuff with all their cool powers. Admittedly, I think I would agree with him. However, how he thought he was going to take down the entire X-Men team with powers that simply allowed him to turn into ice cream, I do not know. Needless to say, it did not go well for Ice Cream in that endeavor. Is Ice Cream the villain with the weirdest powers? Let me know other villains that you feel like have very bizarre, unexplainable powers. It's time to get into some of the weirdness that is the Great Lakes Avengers. Being that this isn't the mainstay Avengers team, they are about as strange and in some cases unimpressive as you'd expect. Doorman is one of the members of the Great Lakes Avengers. As lackluster as his name is, his power can sometimes be very useful, but the issue with it is that it's so specific. So finding the right and best way to utilize it can be challenging. Although to his credit, I'd like to say that Doorman does a pretty good job with how and when he uses his powers. Doorman's powers allow him to create in essence a doorway to, or a door between adjacent areas that are separated by a wall. So he's kind of like a moving portal, which can be useful in some cases and much less useful in others. Chamber is a weird character, but also a beloved character. Like many weirdos that I love to talk about, Chamber is also a mutant. His name is Jonathan Starsmore, and while he may actually have the potential to be considered Omega level, that doesn't make his powers any less weird, let's be real. His power relates to the fact that he is actually made of pure psionic energy. When his powers first manifested as a result, they blew a massive hole in his chest and his face, blowing off his jaw. While many people would be immensely harmed or even killed by such an occurrence, Chamber was not. Jono, as a result, no longer needed to breathe, eat, or drink, and his blood even did not need to course through his veins to keep him alive. As such, he is typically seen with a scarf or some other clothing covering the lower half of his face, and he communicated telepathically as his jaw was blown off when his powers first emerged. Zeitgeist is known for his weird power, which when it first manifested, scarred the face of a young woman he happened to be making out with at the same time. His power is that he can produce acidic vomit, which I'm not really sure how you could best utilize that if you were fighting in a battle, and it would definitely make for quite the hazard if you just had the flu and you were feeling, you know, super unwell, super nauseous. Zeitgeist does wear a protective mouthpiece to help prevent any other dangerous cases from happening, which is good because Zeitgeist's acid vomit is powerful enough that it can actually burn through, get this, solid steel. He is somewhat more durable than your normal mortal human, which of course makes sense if you were someone who can vomit, you know, that level of acid. You'd have to be fairly durable to even be able to do that, to even be able to make that acid and live. Axel Clooney is a mutant and used to be the leader of the X-Force at one point, but more recently led the rival team to X-Statix known as the Excellent. I honestly love Brew, and now his powers are basically the coolest around, but for a while there he wasn't really the coolest per se. You see, Brew may be a mutant, but he's also part of the Brood, so his mutant superpower was actually nothing quite so exciting as some of the others that are out there. Brew's mutant power and mutation actually made him compassionate, which for a Brood is actually a superpower really, as Brood don't really feel compassion, empathy, or sympathy like humans do, but for an X-Men, well, it's a little less impressive. It should be noted though that even though it doesn't sound impressive for a Brood, compassion is, like I said, it's pretty amazing to have as an ability, as Brood are typically unable to feel this emotion at all. And currently, Brew is also king of the Brood, so hey, there's also that. Penance was once the hero known as Speedball, who is now back to being Speedball again actually, thank goodness. His real name is Robert Baldwin. Baldwin decided to change up his superhero appearance and name following the instigating event that led to the first superhero civil war. In the comics, this was similar to but different from the Sokovia Accords that we saw in the MCU. Similar in the sense that many people died, many of them in the case of the comic civilians, different in the sense that it wasn't a tragedy at a political gathering, but rather happened as a result of the New Warriors pursuing supervillains in the interest of their reality TV show. One person, Nitro, went off, killing a bunch of civilians and the rest of his teammates in the process, with Speedball being one of the few people to survive the incident. As a result, it was said that his powers had changed due to his guilt, and they could only be activated when he experienced physical pain. This caused Robert Baldwin to change his name and his appearance, being known as Penance in honor of all the lives lost that he felt responsible for, and wearing an Iron Maiden inspired supersuit covered in spikes, inward spikes. As many spikes as there were casualties, so that he could trigger his powers as needed. Not all mutants get to be as badass as folks like Vulcan or Storm. Case in point, Beak. Although Beak as a character is admittedly pretty cool and pretty brave, his mutant power is more of a physical mutation, which means that he is evidently not considered a favorite for many X-Men fans out there. Beak's powers, if you can call them that, leave him resembling a bird and also make him built like one, but initially in the comics he couldn't even fly. Beak has since figured out how to fly, or rather glide somewhat, but even still he can really only go very short distances, and even going short distances he doesn't really have a ton of like tactical flying skills to speak of either, like he's no angel, you know? Fortunately though, Beak is still a really likable person and character, so he doesn't often need to rely on his mutant powers to be of use. Big Bertha. Oh boy. So Big Bertha can basically transform her body, adding mass, weight, and height as needed, and even controlling where the added mass goes specifically in regards to her figure and the added weight's distribution, which doesn't sound too bad on paper, right? But then the other part of it is that Big Bertha is is actually Ashley Crawford, who was originally known for being a thin, tall runway supermodel. Ashley, of course, can transform from bigger to smaller as well, but to do so she actually has to vomit. I think you can see how this is pretty problematic, to put it lightly. More recently in the comics, Marvel tried to redeem the character and her power set, but needless to say, it's likely for this very reason that we haven't really seen Bertha around in the comics for some time. Tag is definitely one of the weirdest superheroes out there when it comes to his abilities. He is Brian Cruz, a mutant whose powers allow him to tag someone psionically, inciting a telepathic urge to either run away or run towards someone. Yeah, he's basically the game Tag incarnate. He could use his powers to tag multiple people, but if making them emit a psionic signal that encouraged others to run away from them, the range would actually top out at about 100 meters away. Then the urge for people to run away would just simply stop, so it's also got weird restrictions, to be honest. I mean, I guess you gotta have restrictions somewhere, right? Phantom X has to be one of the weirdest characters in all of Marvel Comics. He has a lot of powers that are strange, but one of the strangest is that his nervous system can turn into a flying ship. It can turn into a flying ship. His nervous system also has a name and also even has pronouns. She is known as Eva, which is technically an acronym. Eva can separate herself from Phantom X and turn into a ship controlling herself, so she can fly herself around. And Phantom X can also sometimes control Eva, but it requires a lot of focus for him to do that. At first, she's not sentient, but can become a separate entity still, but as time goes on, she evolves and she changes. And even at one point when Phantom X seemingly dies, she herself turns into a humanoid being and does end up developing sentience. Eva also seems to have a symbiotic connection to Phantom X in the sense that if she is hurt, Phantom X can typically feel it. However, while she is separate from Phantom X, this means that he doesn't actually have a nervous system himself. All in all, Eva seems to be one of the weirdest powers, one of the weirdest things that I've just ever heard of. Not just within Marvel, but within maybe all of comics. Definitely up there for me.
Jessica Drew's Spider-Woman gained her powers from a serum based on arachnid blood and a genetic accelerator created by the High Evolutionary. While she gained some abilities that make sense for a spider, super strength and wall crawling abilities like Spider-Man, she also gained other powers that make, no sense. Drew gained venom blasts. Now this wasn't venom like when you get bit by a poisonous spider. Similar to Miles Morales, her body possesses an inordinate amount of bioelectricity that she has learned to channel and discharge through her hands in controlled bursts that vary in power from being able to stun a person's nervous system to being able to completely take their lives. Now, I'm not really complaining that much because I like how her and Miles use this ability, and it is pretty darn cool. All I'm saying is that I don't know any spiders personally that can discharge bioelectricity, and I should know because I asked Google. Funnily enough though, spiderwebs are able to conduct some electricity, so little fun fact for you. There you go. But while we're on the topic of spider people who call themselves Spider-Woman, the second Spider-Woman was Julia Carpenter, who gained her powers when Valerie Cooper had her join an athletic study that saw Julia doused with a mixture of spider venom and plant extracts. That's cool. This isn't about weird ways people gain their powers. The problem is that a chunk of Julia's main powers were psionic in nature. She used psionics in order to wall crawl and fire psionic webs. According to the wiki, by using psychokinetic energy, she can, quote, bind ambient free-floating molecules into strands of solid force. She can do most of the same things Spider-Man can do with these webs, including webbing up bad guys and even swinging. But then, her psi webs can also be used in ways Spider-Man's webs never could, such as causing webs to form from a distance or controlling the movement of her webbing mentally. It's always been just like a tiny little bit weird and ridiculous, but the main question I have about it is just why? David Haller, or as he came to be known, Legion, was living in Paris with his mother when her home was invaded by a team of assassins. They took out David's stepfather before his eyes, which kicked off his latent psionic powers, which he used to incinerate the brains of the assassins. As he did that, he also made telepathic contact with each of his victims, thus experiencing their thoughts and emotions as they were incinerated, which, as you can imagine, deeply affected David and forced him into a catatonic state. Now, this event had splintered David's personality personality into multiple alters, with each of these alters controlling a different psionic power. David became an Omega level mutant able to create spontaneous mutations of different kinds that are accompanied by new personas or alters to govern each of these new mutations. Now, David himself stated that he had 200 Omega level split personalities, and originally all of Legion's powers were psychically based, but since his resurrection, Legion has also manifested physical mutations, and his mind is shown as being inhabited by thousands of alters. Now obviously, this is not at all how personality disorders work at all, and it makes very little sense that new powers just kind of form, but man, if the character is not incredibly complex and interesting, so it's perfectly fine. It is actually fine, it's cool. Now while you may think that the power of Bruce Banner to turn into a big old rage monster with infinite strength and durability who can shake the literal multiverse with his punches is pretty unrealistic and maybe makes no sense, it's actually the Hulk's ability to see ghosts that has always confused me. The Hulk persona has the ability to see astral projections and ghosts, and he can even interact with them if he chooses to. Hulk's astral form perception has come in handy when working with Doctor Strange as a defender. Now, as with most of Bruce Banner's issues, this is because of his father. Bruce subconsciously feared his father's ghosts would come back to haunt him. Like literally come back to haunt him, and so the Hulk just developed this mechanism to allow him to look out for that ghost. There isn't really more to it than that. For the super intelligent Bruce Banner, it would make a bit more sense, but it's actually been suggested that Bruce has a diminished ability to see these ghosts when compared to the telepathically resistant Hulk. Now next up, I'm going to talk about Wolverine's healing factor, because seriously, WTF. I love Wolverine's healing factor. It's an awesome ability and it makes him so much more compelling, but that thing has not only been wildly inconsistent, it has also stopped making sense way long ago. Back in the day, Wolverine would be able to heal from flesh wounds and other relatively minor injuries almost instantly, with bigger injuries usually taking quite a bit longer to recover from. But that's changed, especially with more modern stories and people kinda just accepting it as part of his character. Now, almost all injuries heal pretty instantly and aren't even a problem for the little guy. But even more than that, injuries that have either threatened to or literally have sent him on a one-way trip to the big guy upstairs in the past are just a walk in the park for the mutant now. I like that Wolverine seems to survive almost anything. It's cool, and I get that his healing factor has been enhanced or diminished for certain stories, but I don't know, sometimes you can poke holes in comic book logic, that's just how it works. Now, a lot of people in the comments of the last video had something to say about me choosing Thumbelina because I said that she shouldn't be able to retain her full strength at that tiny little size. And I stand by that. It doesn't compute for me. But what about all the Ant-Men? What about Wasp? Those guys mostly get a free pass because they have the magical PIM particles that magically allow them to retain their mass at shrunken sizes. It's actually science, but whatever. Fine, whatever. But how the heck do Wasp's wings work? Do PIM particles' magical mass effects also affect her wings somehow? I'm sure there is some kind of comic book explanation somewhere out there, but logically, there is absolutely no way those tiny little wings should be able to lift Wasp, who I shall remind you, retains her full-grown mass at her miniature size. I'll give you the Wasp being able to punch out a full-grown man at a minuscule size due to her mass being the same. There you go. But don't you dare tell me in the same breath that those minuscule little wings are somehow creating enough lift to allow the weight and mass of a full-grown superwoman to fly. But okay, let's bounce right off that and talk about Hank Pym. So he's been using these PIM particles to shrink himself down while retaining his mass. Cool. Whatever. So, explain to me what happens when he gets bigger. Please tell me he retains his same mass. If that is the case, he should not be able to do the stuff that he does. He should not be super strong. If he is retaining the same mass, then his muscles are not getting any denser, which is the only way he would get stronger. Now, if you're going to tell me that as he grows his muscles do get denser and he increases in mass, then there is almost no way he should be able to realistically move, especially not with the speed at which he sometimes does. Now I promise you, Ant-Man, and all you other shrinking and or growing heroes, I promise you, I will bring you down. Your entire empire of pseudoscience lies right down on your heads, I swear it. Okay. Cool. Enough about the tiny little people. Now we talk about a king of Atlantis. Namor the Submariner has many things about his character and abilities that give one pause, but most of it is kind of hand-waveable, and that's because Namor's kinda cool. He's a jerk, but he's kinda cool. What I refuse to just wave off, what I refuse to turn a blind eye to, is those ridiculous ankle wings. Nah. Absolutely not. If the Wasp's little micro wings shouldn't be able to lift her normal mass, then there is no way in all the 7 seas that Namor can generate lift with his flimsy little ankle wings. Generating lift is one thing, but then His Royal Highness actually moves with some significant speed. He is able to fly at the speed of escape velocity when exerting himself fully, and at normal levels he is able to fly faster than military aircraft. Just no. The Marvel Wiki even makes note of the fact that those little winglets could never let him fly that fast, so it's suggested that he flies by some other means and uses the wings to steer. I'll tell you how he flies. BS. That's how. A big pile of BS. Now, there are a lot of characters in comics who have access to energy-based powers. It's been a thing for a long time, but there is a big difference to being able to use energy and being energy. The Avenger known as Wonder Man is a being of ionic energy. This energy gives him insane levels of superhuman strength, invulnerability, effective immortality, energy manipulation, and all that fun stuff. He is not a big old meat sack like the rest of us. He stated during an incident in which all the living things in New York had been morphed into symbiotes that he was an ion being, and it was the prime reason that he himself had not been infected. Wonder Man's physical form is purely subjective. What shape or form he takes is ruled by conscious thought, but funnily enough, he still has a healing factor that lets him survive very physical attacks. And funnily enough, in his early days, almost all of his abilities were physical in nature. I like Wonder Man. I just see some rather interesting things here. That's all I'm saying. And finally, Wanda Maximoff is problematic in many different ways. She has used her abilities to rewrite history and the state of the entire world, and she's used them to rob millions of mutants of their own powers. She's materialized entire alien invasion forces, made people intoxicated when they were not, and that was all mainly due to a thing called the Life Force retcon. When Wanda first appeared, she had the ability to alter probability, and then she gained access to chaos magic. Now, once you put the word magic in there, you can basically just throw all the logic out the window and just smile and nod. She is a magical character, so all realism is automatically suspended. Like other magical Marvel characters, she can call on divine empowerment, she can do almost anything, really. It's just that Wanda will go from being like just the Scarlet Witch to basically a godlike being without much warning or explanation, depending on who is writing her. It's just really hard to get a thumb on what her actual capability is, because one minute she can alter her entire reality, and the next she needs a power boost. It's hard to know where her baseline is, so maybe this point isn't so much about her powers not making sense logically, but that they just need to be a little bit better defined.
Devil Dinosaur comes from the prehistoric past of Earth 78411. Most people think of him as just a devil beast from Dinosaur World, and yeah, he is that. But did you know that he is also a mutant? Yep, his mutant gene activated after a traumatic experience with fire. Fortunately, he was saved from those who would harm him by Moon Boy, who befriended the beast. Devil Dinosaur's skin changed to red as a result of his mutation, making him a giant bright red dinosaur. Really stands out. Which honestly kinda makes me think of Clifford the Big Red Dog. I wonder if Clifford is also secretly a mutant with a secret mutation. He has like bright red fur. So strange. Devil Dinosaur was partnered with Moon Boy for quite some time until Moon Boy's death, wherein a new new character was introduced to work alongside Devil Dinosaur, a girl with inhuman genes known as Lunella Lafayette, or Moon Girl. We love Lunella. I love DD too. He's also a really great card in Marvel Snap, by the way, especially if you pair him with Moon Girl. It's one of my favorite combos, even to this day. I don't know what's more frightening, the fact that Jean can basically manipulate people's dreams and nightmares through the villain Nightmare, or the threat she gave Nightmare after defeating him in the comics, where she threatened to destroy him at an atomic level. Yikes. Either way you slice it though, when it comes to nightmares that have been created by the god of nightmares himself, Jean is actually the one who would really call the shots between them when they're pitted against one another. I know you'd think Nightmare would come out on top here, but Jean is just that powerful. She could not only use him to take control of others' dreams the world over, but of course could also just take control of those dreams from Nightmare himself, and even match him, or really even beat him in his own realm, which is pretty wild. Chamber is a weird character, but also a beloved character. Like many weirdos that I love to talk about, Chamber is of course also a mutant. His name is Jonathan Starsmore, and while he may actually have the potential to be considered Omega level, that doesn't make his powers any less weird, thank goodness. His power relates to the fact that he's actually made of pure psionic energy. Now while many people know that Jono is psionic, because you know he's always talking telepathically, I don't think many folks actually think about like why his powers manifesting caused him to lose his jaw. I mean, I'm sure the hardcore Jono fans know all about this, but for those of you that are a casual Chamber fan, I'm gonna get into it. When his powers first manifested, they blew a massive hole in his chest and his face. While many people would be immensely harmed or even killed by such an occurrence, Chamber was not. As a result, Jono no longer needs to breathe, eat, or drink, and his blood does not even course through his veins. It doesn't need to do that to keep him alive. Yeah, as such he is typically seen with a scarf or some other clothing covering the lower half of his face, and he communicates telepathically, as you know, he can no longer talk since he has no jaw. Also, he's made of psionic energy, so he's a very powerful psionic mutant. By far one of the strangest, yet kinda in a weird way most OP characters of all time from Marvel has to be Duke. Okay, so he's at the very least the most strange. And now we have his evil counterpart, Pood in Excellent, who might somehow be weirder. Oh boy. Dupe is pretty powerful because he has some fourth wall shattering level of awareness, and he's able to actually move between panels in comics, existing not just within the panels of the page, but also moving into the borders and margins as well, able to exist outside of the panels that we're used to reading, which I think is pretty wild. I mean, not many other characters can do that, never mind mutants. Granted, we don't really know what Dupe is, or you know, if he's really a mutant, but he definitely hangs out with the X-Men a lot, and I feel like he's so weird, I just would believe he is a mutant in some way in his origin. Though at this point in time, there's no definitive origin for the character yet, just to be fully transparent here. He's also demonstrated some powerful magical abilities too, as well as super strength, speed, durability, and even the power to resurrect. Without the help of the Five no less, he can just do that by himself, so he's got a lot of powers that I feel like not a lot of people think about. The Love Eyes is one of my favorites. Never forget Madelyne Prior's awesome telekinetic lasso. What an awesome and totally bizarre weapon for a goblin queen to wield. Maybe we can call it a telekinetic whip instead. That seems more fitting based on Maddie's kinda generally crazy and definitely vicious and vengeful disposition. Madelyne Prior as the Goblin Queen used this lasso to wrangle, get this, Jean Grey. That's right, her lasso was powerful enough to wrangle Jean, who herself is considered, now at least, an Omega level mutant in both psionic areas of power. What's more, Maddie's psionic whip was so powerful, it also like basically just rendered Jean powerless when they were having their fight. So yeah, I feel like if you can use any kind of lasso to render Jean Grey powerless, that's impressive. Why doesn't she use it more often? She should bring it back. I want to see the lasso again. Let's bring it back. Training with Doctor Strange made magic even more powerful. She already has all the knowledge imparted to her by Alternate Storm and of course Belasco and all his magical texts, so adding in the teaching of Doctor Strange has made her an insane level of powerful when it comes to her magical abilities. At one point she used her knowledge to turn herself and a group of other supers, including mutants and some Guardians of the Galaxy members, invisible. Yeah, and a gambit to buy time when her teleportation powers just couldn't cut it. It's not really like a mutant power, but it is a power that a mutant has. So, see what I did there? There's something about people being in near-death experiences that seemingly allow them to evolve in some way and survive. Mask is another one of the mutants that has experienced that. Mask was inherently more of a villain in the comics and also a Morlock. However, being a Morlock wasn't what made him evil. What made him evil was kind of his outlook on life. His mutant powers allowed him to alter the appearance of others, basically turning him into one of the world's most powerful plastic surgeons of all time. But at the same time, Mask was considered himself to be hideous. Hence why he hid in the underground tunnels of New York with the Morlocks and, was a Morlock, because that's kind of their whole thing. And his powers did not work on his own physical appearance, tragically. That is until he was nearly killed by Shatterstar. Now, to survive, he had to actually move his organs around, so this gave him the power to manipulate his appearance. He leveled up. He gained what we would call a secondary mutation. For a while, he also used his powers to appear as Marilyn Monroe while leading the Morlocks. Although now Mask has seemingly gotten over his obsession with beauty and usually chooses to just appear as he is. Either that or people forgot that this power existed, but I'm gonna go with the route of, Mask just loves himself now, because I like that story for him. Moira was usually known as more of an ally to the X-Men for many years, and none of us would have ever suspected that she had powers at all. She has been known as a mutant ally throughout many comics, often Charles Xavier's ill-fated lover, and if you don't see her as being a major player in the comics, let me just remind you that she was the one who figured out how to cure the legacy virus, and I honestly think that elevated her even to a superhero status if we're talking about it. We found out Moira McTaggart was a mutant recently in modern comics during the House of X series. We learned that she had done more than just die in the comics. We learned that her powers allowed her to actually be reborn, but not in a traditional sense of superpowers. This isn't a healing factor or a resurrection. Her powers actually allow her to relive her life again. Yeah, so it's kind of like a reincarnation. From birth to death, starting in the womb. So she's living the same years, but she can use her actions to alter history, making her an odd but surprisingly powerful mutant. But not everyone knows about Moira McTaggart and her powers, so there you go. This is less of a power, this next one, and more of just a really interesting fact about a power, but I didn't know this myself initially and I was surprised by it somewhat, so I figured I would just share it with you and count it as a point on this list. Now, we all know that Jean is one of the preferred hosts, if not, I would say, the preferred host for the Phoenix Force, but did you know that the all-powerful cosmic entity was actually holding Jean back? Yeah, apparently that's right. Jean has stated before that she actually became aware after the Phoenix Force left her that it was actually causing her to hold back her abilities for fear of the Phoenix taking a hold of her and possessing her. So while many like to say that Jean has only ever been extremely powerful when she's merged with the Phoenix, like that's Jean at her most powerful, it turns out that it's probably just the opposite, because she literally fought to hold herself back, which honestly to me makes some sense. Saying Jean isn't actually powerful and that it's like all the Phoenix has always just felt like kind of a cop-out to me, considering that it's her own power and empathy that the Phoenix was seemingly attracted to in the first place. Like that's why she's the ideal host, so to me that makes sense. But that also means some crazy stuff. That means Jean could destroy maybe the multiverse herself, you know what I mean? Because Phoenix can destroy planets, so... I always forget about Kid Omega's secondary mutation because it very rarely comes up in the comics, and I feel like it's also therefore a power that a lot of people are gonna forget. Now, I usually probably forget about it because Quentin Quire no longer really finds it interesting. At least, that's the canon reason that we're given for why we really never see it anymore. I personally think it sounds super interesting, and I'm surprised that he's bored of it. However, this is Quentin, so maybe I shouldn't be so surprised. Quentin Quire is a bit of an oddball. He's often unimpressed as well by some of the coolest stuff. He's very whatever, I'm over it. Or at least, he presents himself this way often. Kid Omega's power that I'm about to talk about here is that he has a non-corporeal form, which when accessed also speeds up his consciousness and actually allows him as a telepath to reach out and connect with all sentient beings. Yeah, basically all of Earth he could just connect with. He can think at the speed of light while in this form, but then again, even when Quire isn't in it, he's known for being one of the fastest thinkers and one of the smartest psionics on the planet, so I think we kept that part, but we forgot about the non-corporeal stuff.
Coming in at number 10 today is the Hulk. Now just hold on a sec before you get up in arms. Everyone knows the Hulk's ability to turn into a big old green monster and rip things apart with a strength that increases based on his anger. But What many of you may not know is that Hulk actually possesses a much more subtle ability to see astral projections and ghosts, and even interact with them if he chooses to. Hulk's astral form perception has come in handy when working with Doctor Strange as a defender, but why does Hulk even have this ability in the first place? Well, Bruce Banner subconsciously feared his father's ghost would come back to haunt him, like literally come back to haunt him. And so, the Hulk just developed this mechanism to allow him to look out for that ghost. There isn't really more to it, that's just kind of it. Hulk just developed the ability that is something usually reserved for telepaths and magic users. For the super intelligent Bruce Banner, it would make a bit more sense, but it's actually been suggested that for Bruce, the clarity of the astral forms are diminished when compared to the telepathically resistant Hulk's ability to view them. With Immortal Hulk and the connection to the One Below All, perhaps that could serve as some kind of fan explanation, but that's all we got. Number 9, Dupe. This bumpy looking lima bean is and was basically the mascot of a bunch of different mutant teams in Marvel Comics, while also low-key being one of the heaviest hitters around. Dupe is unable to learn English, and as such he speaks in a language all of his own that everyone can somehow understand. According to Captain America, the US government created him in a secret weapons project, and he was instrumental in the fall of the Soviet Union. But then, apparently, he also comes from a place called Marginalia, quote, the world between worlds and place that begins where the story ends. Which is basically to say that we don't actually know where he comes from for sure. The most surprising thing about Dupe though is his list of powers. It is long. He has possible omniscience, he's strong and durable enough to defeat Thor, he can heal from super serious wounds in seconds and resurrect himself, he has blinding speed, size alteration, energy projection, psionic fire, blasts and shields, he can perform quote, dupish magic and has the power of the funk. Oh, and Dupe's body also contains a nightmare dimension known as Dupeland, and he is able to access that by turning himself inside out. It's not just Dupe's powers that are weird, it's literally the whole package. He's weird. Number 8. Hindsight Lad. To be completely candid here, Hindsight Lad's powers are not actual powers, but he acts like they are, and that means I'm gonna talk about it. Carton Lafroige was a nuisance before he ever became Hindsight Lad, but when he found out that his neighbor, Robbie Baldwin, was Speedball of the New Warriors, he threatened to reveal Robbie's secret identity unless Robbie let him be a part of the team. And he actually managed to prove very useful, and did have some tactical ability which eventually got him fully put on the team. He kind of became their guy in the chair, but that's because his self-given power was the power of hindsight. The power to look back at all the superhero fights that he's been a part of and analyze them, quote unquote, and now with the present hindsight, he can tell the heroes what they should have tried differently, which in his mind meant they can now go prepare for that exact same scenario if it plays out again, which in a comic book, that's probably not gonna happen. Just saying. Number 7, El Guapo. Robbie Rodriguez, who goes by El Guapo, is a mutant from the Marvel Universe, but that kind of opens up a whole bunch of questions because Robbie doesn't seem to have any real powers of his own, unless you consider his symbiotic relationship with his flying skateboard a superpower. His wiki page refers to this as idiosyncratic manipulation, suggesting that Robbie actually does have total control over his skateboard, but the problem with that statement is that his skateboard has also acted with a mind of its own, like when it beat him up for cheating on his girlfriend. Now, an argument could be made that perhaps it's his own subconsciousness beating himself up for doing the wrong thing, but that's just a me theory, and Marvel did not state this to be true or even explain his ability at all, really. It's not telekinesis, and the board seems to have a mind of its own. It's weird. I don't know what to say. Number 6, Phantom X. When I first read a comic with Phantom X in it, I did not fully understand his power, and I still don't really. So now I'm gonna try and explain something to you guys that I do not understand. Cool? Cool. So basically, Phantom X, or Charlie Cluster 7, or Weapon 13, or John Philippe, was experimented on by Weapons Plus, and was genetically grown and evolved using Sentinel technology. Thanks to this, he actually has, or had, 3 brains for independent parallel processing, nanoactive blood, and his primary nervous system is actually a detachable techno-organism called Eva. So there's some stuff to break down there. Eva can fly herself and can generate bioelectric electric charges to be used in attacks, with Phantom X being both telepathically and symbiotically linked to Eva. His multiple brains allow him to think like a sort of supercomputer similar to Sage, but it also gives him access to 2 extra, quote, personalities, a charmer and a super deadly mutant hunter. He can create extremely powerful illusions and enter a trance state where he can rapidly heal himself. And his self-supremacy over his own body and mind allow him to overcome pretty much anything to complete his mission, including mind control. I can't talk too much more about him because of time, but know he has enhanced senses, is a dope fighter, and does not create any kind of odor from his own body. Just look into the guy, he's really weird, but he's also really cool. Number 5, Iska the Unbeaten. Iska is thousands of years old and is the sister of Genesis, who is the wife of Apocalypse, so fun little fact for you. She is a hardened warrior who respects power and strength like the other mutants of Araco, and her powers kind of reflect that. Iska's power is psychokinesis, which is the power over luck and probability, but specifically, her power means that she cannot lose, or the better way to say it is that she always wins. This includes one-on-one contests, votes, and wagers, but also larger battles where she is a member of a team or an army. In contests of skill, her powers might give her the talents she needs to win, or she might just win through, quote, improbable circumstances. So far, it's sounding pretty good. Always winning is so good, it just sounds like ridiculous and lazy writing. Because it kinda is. But it also means that in larger battles or wars, her powers weigh the probability of the 2 sides and literally make her defect from the losing side and join the winning side, even if the losing side was composed of those she truly cares about. Meaning that even though she still technically won, she betrayed her closest friends and allies. Her power has also famously been used against her and one of her allies. When Tarn the Uncaring faced off against Magneto, the mutant Sunspot bet Iska that Tarn would win. So because she would be betting against Tarn, someone she's fought beside for thousands of years, he was actually easily wiped off the face of Mars by Magneto, who crushed his head like a cherry. Her power is really good, it's just got some really crummy loopholes sometimes. Number 4, Adam X. Adam Naramani is honestly quite a bit interesting. He was a genetically created hybrid of both Emperor Dekun of the Shi'ar Empire and Catherine Summers from Earth, created in an attempt to introduce more genealogies to the Shi'ar Empire. Now, just as his origin is unique, so are his powers. Adam has the ability of electrokinetic hymopyrokinesis, or if you don't want to hurt yourself trying to say that, you can also say sanguine combustion, which sounds way cooler. It basically means that he can send an electric surge through oxygenated blood, which leads to ignition of the electrolytes present in said blood, causing a person to burn from the inside out, which could result in a little subtle warming effect, or it could completely disintegrate a person, so there's a lot of wiggle room here. Thanks to his Shi'ar side of things though, he also has enhanced strength, agility, reflexes, stamina, speed, vision, and healing. Couple all that with his awesome fighting skills and the cool cybernetic retractable claws that he has, and Extreme, which is his name, is someone you probably don't want to mess with. Number 3. Tag. I actually kinda wish I had Brian Cruz's power. It just seems like the perfect chaos creating ability, and that to me is hilarious. Tag's ability, known as the Pariah effect, allowed him to use a form of telepathy when he touched someone that caused the target to emit a psionic signal, which would make them a target for others to run away from or run towards. Whichever way people would run, they would do it while being fully aware of what they were doing, but unable to control themselves. If they were being controlled to run away, they would continue to do so until they were about 100 feet away. But if the signal caused them to run towards whoever was, quote, it, then they would dogpile on top of whoever that was. What's strange, other than everything about this, is that he could also control who was affected by the ability, but like how? He only made one person it, so how does he decide who runs away and who doesn't? He could also make whoever was it run away from themselves, which is just what? In other words, they would just run uncontrollably and in random directions, which is actually kind of hilarious. The fun thing about him is he would also always say, "You're it," which is kind of misleading because that person can't tag someone else or make them it. I don't know. It's weird, but it's really cool. Number 2, Cora of the Burning Heart. Can we please just get an applause for literally the coolest name ever? Cora of the Burning Heart is a mutant from Morocco where she served as an assassin and primarily used her power only to boost her own abilities in battle, thanks to the Iraqi being really stubborn, honor-bound fighters or whatever. But Cora's abilities can actually help others as well. Cora's heart is essentially an internalized combustion furnace, which generates life force energy. Thanks to that energy, she can get this really awesome looking flaming skeletal appearance, and she uses this constant energy source to give herself incredible physical capabilities, as well as boost up the powers of others around her to even greater heights. She was a member of the X-Terminators alongside Cable, and she is also part of SWORD. Also, Cora of the Burning Heart. Just wanted to say it again. Number 1. Chamber. Chamber, or Jonathan Evans Starsmore, discovered his powers when a blast of psionic energy that burst from his torso destroyed much of his chest and face. That doesn't sound good, but it turns out that Chamber is literally composed of that same psionic energy, with his body just acting as a shell for it. When his powers burst out of him, the wound was replaced by a constant glow of psionic fire, leaving him unable to speak. Instead, he can only communicate telepathically. Additionally, because he is made of energy, he does not eat, drink, or even breathe because he has no organs. Chamber constantly created and unleashed psionic charges of energy that could strike with volatile force, being projected as a blast from his chest, a series of guided streams that struck specific targets, or as a massive eruption striking in all directions. If he was given the time to train properly, Chamber could have potentially been one of the most powerful mutants to walk the earth. Also, in one story, he's used as literally like a jet engine on a spaceship. It's really weird, but super cool.
I thought I knew it all when it came to Superman, but I had my mind absolutely blown today. The Silver Age was a weird time for the Man of Steel. In addition to his usual superpowers of flight, super strength, invulnerability, heat vision, and super breath, writers often gave him a plethora of bizarre powers for individual stories. Whether it was using super muscular control to change his face's appearance, or using his super mind to telepathically control others, the pre-crisis Superman could seemingly do anything. You heard me right. I think it was in Action Comics issue 55 and various Golden Age stories. This guy couldn't just change the shape of his face, but in some cases, his entire body. In early adventures, he used to disguise himself as a disgraced sports player, an alien creature, all of which begs a pretty obvious question. Why on earth would he rely on a pair of nondescript glasses to hide his identity when he could just change his face? That's gonna stick with me. One of his most bizarre powers was the super kiss. Look folks, consent is a beautiful thing, and this is a weird gray area that launched my eyebrows into space faster than you could say kryptonite. Superman first used the super kiss in Action Comics issue 306, when he planted one on Lois Lane so hard it left her dizzy, flushed, and sweating profusely in the middle of the Daily Planet's Christmas party. While the rest of the Planet's staff wondered why Lois couldn't suddenly walk, Clark was like, I'm going to congratulate myself on my secret tongue talents. His tonsil hockey talents were then showcased in Superman 2 when he planted a kiss on Lois to make her forget that they had shacked up in the Fortress of Solitude for a couple of weeks. Thankfully, this creepy superpower hasn't been seen since, because I'd be freaking out if it did. Has anyone ever counted how many versions of Wolverine's claws there have been over the years? They're one of the deadliest weapons in the Marvel Universe, and over the course of the character's history, he's seen nearly as many upgrades, alterations, alternate versions, and imitations of his claws as he changes his ever-shifting backstory. Of course, as the saying goes, some Wolverines are more deadly than others. The Fireclaw's version of Wolverine, imbued with the powers of Ghost Rider, not only looks amazing, but the idea of being slashed with those flaming claws is legitimately nightmarish. Considering the absolute havoc these claws have the potential to wreak, anyone coming face to face with this iteration of Wolverine is in major peril, including, a lot of folks. While the relative deadliness of some characters versus others can and should be debated, it is inarguable that a Wolverine with claws made of literal burning hellfire is one of the most dangerous creations in comic lore. Also, don't confuse them with his Hawk Claws, which is a version that glows white and is super hot, and takes the deadliness to an entirely unparalleled level. Aside from being able to cut through anything and everything, this Wolverine would need to do little more than gently poke the average person with even the tip of one of his claws, and it would result in their immediate death. In the same vein as the Fire Claws, the Hawk Claws have the edge, because while the Fire Claws could possibly be difficult to be precise with, the Hawk Claws allow Wolverine to be as meticulous with his kills as ever. Ooh! While we're on the topic of fire, did anybody know that Luke Cage can actually make fire? So ever since the popular show came out on Netflix, we all love him. We first saw him in the Jessica Jones show, then he got his own show, and we were like, heck yes. We know he's superhumanly strong, and being injured doesn't really faze him, but he can create fire. So in one scene we see him walk out of his bar, on fire, he's unharmed, but what we don't see is him being able to rub his hands together, create enough friction, and make flames. Okay, imagine this. If Luke Cage holds, say, a pencil or a stick of wood, then by sliding the wood through his hands, the wood would catch fire because of friction. It's the same premise as cavemen making fire, or how Tom Hanks made it in the movie Castaway. Luke's ability to make fire could have aided him in several situations, or just like, could be fun for a campfire. Okay, either I fell asleep during the Thor movies, or I just somehow completely missed his pet goats? Curse you, MCU, for taking away an element of this character that would only serve to make him more of a Disney princess than he already is. Much of Thor's powers and arsenal comes straight out of Norse mythology. There's of course his weapon, and his much more infrequently used belt of strength that temporarily imbues him with even greater strength. Then there's his mystical chariot, which he can instantly summon to travel in between the 9 worlds. The chariot is unique because it's driven by 2 large goats. Both of them have been shown to be extremely intelligent in various comics. Once Odin used the goats to summon reinforcements, while another time they saved Asgard's offspring when the city was attacked by invaders. One mythological aspect that hasn't carried over is that Thor often eats the goats before battle and then resurrects them the following day using Mjolnir. Okay, never mind that comment earlier about Disney princess energy. Eating your own pets is more Disney villain category and super weird. Oh, you know what? I know what I was thinking when I said Disney princess, and somebody forgot to tell me that Wonder Woman can talk to animals? Yes, I know, all her abilities are super cool, but talking to animals is so precious, and we've been robbed of that on screen. Technically, we saw a bit of this during Linda Carter's run as the DC heroine when she was shown speaking with a bird in one episode, and it's been a prominent Wonder Woman ability in the comics as well. So since she's a favorite of Zeus and other gods, these Greek gods granted Diana several superhuman abilities, and among them, the power to communicate with animals. So in the comics, you can see her speaking with like all types of creatures, tigers, lions, you name it. It's unlikely we'll get to see Wonder Woman speak to animals on the big screen anytime soon, since DC is restructuring at the moment, but despite being a rather obscure superpower among fans, it's so cool! Okay, let's move away from the big guys for a moment and focus on a personal favorite hero, or villain depending on your point of view, Homelander. So in the boys comics, his powers include heat vision, super strength, durability, flight, super hearing, and enhanced vocal cords. He also ages more slowly than a normal human thanks to Compound V. He also has X-ray vision, which enables him to see through anything except for stuff that has zinc, which, haha, I see that Superman nod. But in the show, I don't think we've really seen any reference to his enhanced vocal cords yet, or maybe I'm totally having a mind blank. Maybe that's something we can hope for in season 4, since it's almost here. Okay. Back to Marvel we go, with everything you forgot you knew about Captain America. Cap was the 3rd Marvel superhero to be brought into the MCU. Iron Man and Thor both made very strong appearances, but the story of Steve Rogers becoming the big hero he is today was heartwarming to a lot of fans. There's a reason he's my favorite MCU soup, and the only one I've technically cosplayed. Through his trilogy and the Avengers films, we get to see a lot of his abilities like super strength, healing, speed, and more. One thing we don't get a lot of explanation about is his super heightened vision, which enables him to see further, sharper, and more quickly than normal humans. I feel like this really could have come in handy in more than a few instances, but I guess it was too much to translate on screen. One thing we see but don't really realize is that Cap can literally never get tired. He sleeps and everything, but he is totally immune to fatigue, which really helps you understand how he's so on the go during a fight. Yes, it's a little more subtle, but it's totally worth a mention in my opinion. Seeing as Spidey in the MCU is the 3rd time in recent history that the webhead has made it to the big screen, I'm pretty sure people who aren't Marvel fans know the ins and outs of Spider-Man's most basic abilities. Heck, back when I knew next to nothing about superheroes, I could name a few of them. But today I learned about a handful that I'm surprised haven't been brought to the screen more. One thing we're very rarely shown is his ability to communicate with spiders, similar to how Ant-Man communicates with ants. Since he has all their climbing, webbing, and heightened senses, it adds up. I know arachnophobes everywhere just shuddered, and well, I'm right there with ya. Still weird that someone who is a spider in every other sense of the word hasn't really been seen talking to the creepy little buggers. Okay, how about in the comics, Peter actually has premonitions. As someone who is always fighting crime and evil, I'm betting this comes in handy for not being fired at or injured. I think he might have used this ability in Infinity War, which is why he seemed so panicked and knew he was fading away, but I'm not positive. Hey, Kevin Feige, wanna weigh in? Please? Another curious one that I'm surprised isn't used more, his ability to grow extra limbs. He might be able to do a lot, but extra limbs aren't as helpful of a skill as one might think. I don't think this has happened in the MCU, but back in a 1971 comic, Spider-Man one day woke up with 6 limbs. Eventually he was saved with an antidote made by Dr. Kirk Connors, but damn, I think it's safe to assume he didn't go to high school that day. Oh, and before I forget, at one point in the comics, he actually had fangs and even stingers coming out of his hands. Eventually, he realized that it was a bit much. Too much spidery and less human. So he was like, okay, we're done. Which, smart move, dude. One lesser known ability about Loki is that the guy can freaking fly. His power of manipulation allows him to levitate, meaning that, technically speaking, he can fly. I'm not sure why he didn't pull this trick out while standing off with Thanos. Come on. Another surprising one, he has super speed abilities. As half frost giant, he has amazingly quick reflexes, thinking abilities, and agility, which means he can probably take down anybody he wants, he just doesn't want to. Ooh, almost forgot. He doesn't look like it with his lean figure, but he has super strength, just like Thor. Okay, he might not be as strong as Thor, but he's still a god and a frost giant, making him far stronger than any mortal human. As a trickster, he uses more of his intellectual powers than brute strength, so we don't get to see him lifting up a car or a building. But he can. Okay, how about I end today with a supervillain just to change things up? Did y'all know that Electro was able to control minds? Context, Maxwell Dillon was working as an electrical engineer, but when he was repairing a power line, he was struck by lightning, and that transformed him into Electro, one of Spider-Man's most dangerous villains and a member of the Sinister Six. With the ability to create and manipulate electricity, one of his hidden powers is the ability to mind control. Theoretically, since Electro can manipulate electric currents, he is able to control a person's brain by controlling their neurons. Neurons, or nerve cells, are cells in the brain that transmit and process data through electric signals. It's possible that in that attempt, Electro could fry somebody's brain, but if he focuses just right, Electro could easily be confused for a telepath. One of his favorite forms of attacks is to directly electrocute someone with electric energy blasts. But little does he know that the fight could be over without him breaking a single sweat.
Being an intergalactic god, traveling from realm to realm, planet to planet, galaxy to galaxy, it's pretty crucial that you be able to communicate with the many different life forms you come into contact with. For Thor, other Asgardians, as well as other deities, they do this by way of the All-Speak. Probably through some form of magic, all form of speech is heard in whatever native tongue the listener is accustomed to. Obviously, this is incredibly useful, especially for those who travel far and wide. As such, other superheroes have had various forms of this kind of omni-speech. The mutant Cypher has the ability to communicate in almost all forms of communication, even being able to speak to the living island Krakoa, speaking in binary code to a robot, which makes no sense, reading body language or architecture, or even spellcasting. The Man-Thing in Marvel Comics spoke in Excelsior, which was apparently a universal language. Communication is the basis of society, so naturally, this is making the list. Have you ever wished that you could turn into a puddle? Probably not, but you might want to reconsider that, especially if you're a puddle that can move on its own accord and take various shapes. There are many characters who can achieve a liquid or liquid-like form, and they have used it to great effect. There are characters like Clayface from DC and Sandman from Marvel that, while they are technically turning into mud or sand, they can do some insane things like shapeshift, travel via the air, turn their limbs into hammers, melt away. A lot of the stretching heroes like Plastic Man or Mr. Fantastic can do this to a degree as well. Most shapeshifting characters can make themselves almost liquid, and it allows them to achieve quite a bit more than you'd think. Some other examples would be like the mutant Mercury, Brainiac from DC Comics, or even the T-1000 from Terminator. Next up is dimensional storage. While this kind of power is more often just used as a trope in television and comic books where characters pull objects from seemingly out of nowhere, it has also been used as an actual legit power, and it's all a result of spatial manipulation and or dimensional travel. We have seen this ability used by all sorts of characters, from the wizards of Harry Potter with their tents, buildings, or bags, to characters like Ramona Flowers from Scott Pilgrim who pull a massive hammer out of a tiny little purse. In DC Comics, Green Lanterns store their lantern batteries in a pocket dimension from which they recall it when they need to recharge their rings, and for Marvel, the mutant Abyss houses a portal to an unknown dimension that he can freely pull objects in and out of. Deadpool has been known to use this trick from time to time, although it's hardly ever explained. Then of course most characters with cartoon physics do this too. These pocketed dimensions are not limited to any physical location and can be applied almost anywhere, whether it's a portable bag, a pants pocket, a closet, or with a character like the X-Men's Dupe, it's literally inside of him. A hero with this ability can basically store anything, even people, so long as whatever it is fits through the entry point. Reactive adaptation is basically the ability to just adapt to whatever problem you encounter. An Omega level version of this power is possessed by the Marvel mutant Darwin. The mutant lifeguard has a similar kind of ability, but more focused around healing. Her ability is called Danger Detection Response, and basically what it means is that she can detect danger to her or others' lives in her vicinity, and she can literally evolve whatever powers are necessary for her to stop those lives from being lost. She can gain more than one power at a time and is able to control said power after just a few seconds. It also seems to be kind of limitless in what she or Darwin can do. Ernest Whittle, aka Gold Star, certainly has an odd power. The hero possesses the ability to encourage people to be nice via the niceness vibes that he emits. Now, while this might sound useless on paper, just think about it. With his niceness vibes, Gold Star could quell riots or halt robberies and generally just sway people to the side of good en masse, all without throwing a single punch. Functioning essentially as a low-level empath, Gold Star could nice his way through any problem, making him kind of the ultimate pacifist hero. Debuting in Amazing Spider-Man Swing Shift in 2007, Overdrive proved to be a new kind of villain for Spidey, with the power to convert any vehicle into a souped-up, modded-out escape vehicle with just a touch. Overdrive made a career out of playing getaway driver. Overdrive never saw reason to explore the limits of his powers, preferring instead to work on a quick payday and just get away. But with a better understanding of vehicle mechanics and a little imagination, Overdrive could theoretically morph any jalopy into whatever he desired. He could do like a rocket bike, a jet, a monster truck, even brand new vehicles that we haven't even come up with yet. As a member of the Hellions, Tag, aka Brian Cruz, lent his unusual skill to Emma Frost's personal squad. Cruz was born with the mutant ability to tag, wherein Cruz would make physical contact with a person or an object, imbuing whatever is touched with a psionic signature. When Cruz tags something, he can either cause people to run away from the tagged object or person, or he could cause people to swarm it. Despite the odd nature of the power, tagging allows the mutant to function both defensively by tagging civilians or a teammate to cause villains to avoid them, and offensively tagging someone to make people swarm that individual, making Tag a real double threat. If Tag had been given time to fine-tune his power, he could use his tagging to control entire cities or maybe even planets. We don't know. First appearing in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man number 98 in 1985, as a scientist working for the Kingpin, Dr. Jonathan Owen was assigned to reproduce the radiation levels of the Vigilante cloak to find a way to artificially mimic his powers. So working late one night, he succeeded, creating a solid black circular portal. The power used to create said portal caused a blackout, destabilizing it and prompting Owen to just step into it and pass out. He awoke floating weightlessly in a dimension that was a place of half darkness and half light that contained a large number of portals, and using the original one, he slipped back through to the lab. Now, the portals from the other dimension had adhered to his skin, covering him with black spots from head to toe that were portable space warps. Throwing a punch at Spot, he'll just move a spot in your way and have you punch yourself in the face. Taking a shot at Spot, prepare for those bullets to come zipping right back at you. Spot is essentially a walking bundle of teleportation, making it next to impossible to actually hurt the guy. This is how he beat up Spider-Man in his first appearance. You compound this with constant moving around via short-range teleportation, and you've got a villain that can really mess you up. Bernard Buddy Baker, aka Animal Man in DC Comics, gained access to the morphogenic field, otherwise known as the Red. This field basically allows Buddy to absorb and use different attributes of nearby animals while still being a human. So he has been able to move his eyes independently like a chameleon, he's been able to ram against a speeding car with the abilities of a rhino, and he can fly by tapping into birds, among many other boons. But Animal Man definitely isn't the only one to be able to tap into the abilities of animals. A lot of Teen Titans fans are well aware of Beast Boy, who has a much more direct version of this power, being able to just turn into different animals. And there's also Vixen, who is much the same as Animal Man, being able to tap into whatever animal she needs to borrow the abilities of. This power, like most, gives more questions than anything else, but if you don't worry about the how, and just worry about what you can do with it, It's pretty cool. Next up is photographic reflexes. This superpower is usually attributed to one character, at least in Marvel Comics. That character would be Tony Masters, otherwise known as Taskmaster. Taskmaster's photogenic reflexes ability allows this guy to watch another person's physical movements and duplicate them without any practice or training, no matter how complex those movements are. Tony is able to duplicate almost any physical activity after seeing it done by someone else only once, even using this ability to master complex gymnastics routines and play different pieces of music. But it goes beyond mere mimicry. He has often shown the ability to actually predict an opponent's next move before they even make it, if he has studied their fighting style enough. Opponents who are skilled at improvisational fighting styles or who have a more random, unpredictable style are less likely to have their movements predicted by Taskmaster, of course. But another benefit that comes with his photographic reflexes is that Tony can push his body past its natural limits, meaning his agility and speed can increase itself to match that of other superhumans' speed and agility. It also makes him an excellent teacher, so
Wolverine's healing factor is a mystery. It can make him come back from anything, it seems. It's truly amazing what Wolverine has survived. He survived being at point zero for the bombing of Hiroshima, being one of the men at the Valentine's Day Massacre, multiple world wars, fighting death, being completely destroyed aside from a single drop of himself. How is he still standing? I don't get it. I think Deadpool explains it best. He survives because he's popular. You can't kill off Wolverine. He's Wolverine. He's iconic. Every time he goes away, we want him back. So is it a powerful healing factor keeping the hero around, or fan devotion? I'm not complaining though. Love our Canadian king. Looking forward to seeing Hugh Jackman don the blue and yellow in Wolverine and Deadpool in a few months. Bailey Hoskins is thebomb.com. Literally, he is a bomb. He can blow up, but only once. His power seems ridiculous because that was the point. Bailey debuted in Worst X-Men Ever by Max Bemis. Max wanted to explore what it would be like if someone joined the X-Men that was basically useless until death. Still, you have to wonder, how does Bailey even know how to detonate without ever being able to practice? Is it like breathing? He just knows. How often did he get close to detonation just from sneezing wrong? He got a power suit at one point, but was usually just his human appearing self. His miniseries is cute and pokes fun at the X-Men franchise, so if that's your thing, check it out. Lila Cheney is a rock star and ally to the X-Men. Lila wasn't always a good guy. She did try to steal the Earth once, but she eventually came around. She is capable of intergalactic teleportation. The problem is she can't control it. She also can't travel short distances. It has to be thousands of miles away. I don't understand why. The current explanation is that to teleport she creates a Tachyon field around herself. The field converts matter into particles that are faster than the speed of light. The only thing she can control is what direction she goes in. Apparently once she activates her powers, they just go before she can even think stop. She's already super far away. But in order for her to go anywhere, she needs to specifically know it. If that is the case, shouldn't she just be able to picture her kitchen and go there? To get around the teleportation glitch, she set up a sort of base point, the Dyson sphere. She goes there first, then to her next point, kind of like a plane connection. The other thing is that if her voice is somewhere, she can teleport there. It can cause problems because she is a famous singer, her voice is in a lot of places, but if she has to know specifically where she wants to go, shouldn't just having her voice somewhere not cut it? I don't get it. Ariel the alien is known for her teleportation powers and ability to persuade anyone. You might also recognize her for her bright, over-the-top outfits. She was designed in the 80s and it shows in the most iconic way. The Met Gala is coming up soon and I can't help but think she would fit right in. Ariel is from the planet Coconut Grove and it looks like your average 80s nightclub. All Coconut Grove aliens are capable of teleportation using doors. If there are no doors, too bad. But what I'm confused about is that this ability is apparently not limited to just Coconut Grove residents. It's suggested that anyone could do it if they have the right hands and a good grounding in subjective physics. Has this ever been explored again? I don't think so. Let me know if I'm forgetting something. The only other time I've seen door teleportation like this was in Monsters Inc. In addition to the door powers, Ariel and her family are the mutants of their world, as they are capable of super persuasion. Ariel is described as she who speaks like water running across the stones. Ariel can make people do or think almost anything she wants using her charming, persuasive persuasive voice. However, it seems like a lot of the effectiveness is based on what language she uses, how she knows what to use. I don't know, probably lots of trial and error. Ariel ended up in San Francisco and then joined the X-Men and stayed affiliated with the team since. Hector Mendoza has transparent skin. How is that useful? I'm not sure. Maybe for scientists to study the functions of the human body in real time. Hector did have another power, and it caused the see-through skin. It was an invisibility field. The unfortunate part was that the invisibility didn't work all the way and his skin turned invisible instead of all of him. I don't really know what would be worse, your mutant ability manifesting seemingly halfway and you walk around with your organs out all the time, or if it actually manifested completely and you were invisible forever. He was also able to transfer his invisibility field by touching someone else. He would go back to normal and whoever he touched was affected. And I do suppose in a battle situation that would be a good kind of like psych out tactic. Personally, I'm not used to seeing my organs, so if I were to ever grab this guy with malicious intent, seeing my internal organs would absolutely send me into a panic and he would win. I'm still confused though. Hector was one of the mutants that was depowered after M-Day, so he would have just returned to normal again. Very similar to Hector, the same but different is Glob. Glob is made of bioparaffin wax or living wax. He is a glob of it that commonly takes the form of a human body. The wax is flammable, so he can become a flaming version of himself. He can also fling bits of himself. I have to wonder about that one though. Are the bits kind of like fingernails? Like when I lose a piece of my fingernail, it will just grow back? I'm assuming because he is never lacking wax. He is considered invincible since his wax makes him resistant to damage. He once took a bomb for the Institute and came out fine. Tough kid. I would say that another one of his superpowers is that he's funny. Zorn is a confusing character overall. His origin was one thing and then it was another. He was actually Magneto. Wait, never mind. We need Magneto alive for something else. Okay, Zorn is actually real and also his head is a star. Sorry? What? Someone's head being a star? That's wild. It's a marvel he keeps that thing star even if it is just mini. Because it's a star, he could reverse the natural state of it to make a black hole. It also means he has magnetokinesis or the ability to control magnetic fields. That's why he could fake being Magneto. The star also produces a blinding light because if you were to look him in the eyes, you would be staring into a mini sun. It can also incinerate you so you will not make it out of there no matter what. He also, because his head is a star, doesn't need to breathe or eat or drink water. I've never got that in anything. If someone has a body, how is it sustained without those things? I don't get it, unfortunately. Give me a few days of thinking time, I will get there. Zorn is also a vibe checker. He knows if someone has passed in his general vicinity. I think it has something to do with the fact that he can feel the movement of energy and emotions, I think. Ice Cream, as a whole, I don't understand, but the powers especially. Ice Cream is a mutant that can turn into ice cream. Any flavor, he's not limited. It does have its benefits. Turning into a pile of ice cream means he can slip through grates and tight spaces. However, I can't imagine he is good on the offensive front unless his opponent is lactose intolerant. I suppose he could turn into ice cream and drown someone from the inside out, then that person would have to go to the afterlife with the story that they drowned from ice cream, and that's just funny or embarrassing. The last time I talked about ice cream, I mentioned that in addition to ice cream, he could even turn into a banana split. Someone commented on the video pointing out that a banana split isn't ice cream. You're right, I know that. That's why I'm so confused. Who came up with this? Ice cream has only appeared about like 2 times in the comics. I wonder why. Though he has limited appearances, that does not mean he has no fans. The additional confusing thing about him is he doesn't spell it ice cream with like the letter I, it's E-Y-E, and there's no explanation as to why that is. Soft Serve is a big fan of ice cream. Sometimes talking about certain characters brings me physical pain, and Soft Serve is one of them. Soft Serve is a mutant that poops ice cream. I hope no one is watching this video while eating ice cream. If you are, I'm sorry. Soft Serve can create any flavor of ice cream, and apparently it's actually pretty good. Forge tried it and said it was great. He definitely took one for the team. I don't think many X-Men are strong enough to do that. Obviously, the power is weird. It's weird, so how did it happen? It turns out that she isn't really using her own body to create the ice cream. Her body is actually a portal to the ice cream dimension. So the portal on her body just happens to be in an unfortunate location. Other than her being a big fan of ice cream, the pair are not related. Soft Serve also, shockingly, has only 2 appearances. Mystique has recently been revealed to be a gene shaper, not just a shapeshifter, which is very cool and very confusing. The difference, to put it simply, shapeshifters change their shape, they mimic someone else's look. Gene shapers become that person, rewriting their DNA until they are a copy. That's how Mystique was able to become Nightcrawler's father instead of mother. She gave herself male working anatomy. The thing that has fans wondering though is if she can become an exact gene level copy of someone, why can't she replicate mutant abilities? She can copy them, sure, we've seen that when she copied Wolverine's claws, but that was all surface level. She never actually fully gains the powers. It turns out that the reason might be simple, but also makes everything way more complicated. Mystique appears to currently be limited when it comes to mimicking the X gene. Regular genes, walk in the park. She doesn't even need to think about it. It's the X gene that's tricky. Does that mean she can't? No, she probably can if we are being honest. Now that the big reveal of Nightcrawler's parents has been done, Mystique's writers have the ability to explore her X gene mimicking abilities.
Number 10, Detective Chimp. Detective Chimp might just be a chimp who also isn't necessarily known for his fighting prowess and strength, but he's also an extremely intelligent chimp who is considered to be one of the greatest detectives Earth actually has. Not only that, but he's also been tied to the realm of mysticism after he gained the Sword of Night. And friends, before I move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to let us know that you love us by clicking that like button. Seriously, it feeds the algorithm. Feed the algorithm. Number 9, Forge. Forge is kinda squishy in comparison to some other physically tougher and more durable heroes out there, which is why he makes our cut here. And he's not particularly well known for his fighting prowess, but he is well known for making cool stuff, especially cool weapons, and because of that, he is actually extremely useful. Many also forget that Forge has experience with shamanism and not only has a mutant origin, but an origin that is also attached to the world of magic and mysticism, which honestly is pretty cool. However, for those who want to argue that Forge could march in there alongside someone like Cyclops, I think he'd actually prefer to outfit someone like Cyclops to march into action in his stead, but super souped up so that Cyc alone could stand in for a whole small army of heroes, and of course, Forge himself. Be like, I'll just make you super cool, you go in there, and then it's basically like there's two of us because you're gonna be that cool. Number 8, Fury. This version of Fury we're focusing on here is mainly known by the name of Lita Hall. This version of the character had her origin changed following the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Instead of being Diana Prince, Wonder Woman, and Steve Trevor's daughter, she would become known as the daughter of Helena Cosmatos, also Fury, who was raised instead by Admiral Derek Trevor and Miss America, aka Joan Dale Trevor. In the Sandman universe, she was once the partner of Hector Hall, and the two are going to have a child together when Hector tragically dies. While dead in the real world, Hector's consciousness becomes suspended in a pocket of the dreaming, with Brute and Glob turning him into their new Sandman after Dream's imprisonment. Lita is visited by Hector in her dreams and eventually chooses to stay with him there, but because their child is conceived in the dreaming, he ends up being claimed by the Dream Lord Morpheus once he himself returns. He forces Hector's spirit to move on and explains that one day he will come for Lita's child, who belongs to the dreaming. Despite her Amazonian-like abilities, Lita can be seen as weak in the traditional superhero sense, as she doesn't act as a hero in Neil Gaiman's Sandman series, and instead attempts to pursue a simple, normal life with her son. However, she gets insane anxiety when it comes to being separated from him at any moment because of Dream's threat to one day claim him. Number 7, Dazzler. Dazzler is here not because of how weak she seems, but because of how truly incredible her powers are. The only thing that really makes her seemingly useless is the fact that Alison Blair typically prefers to use her powers for her performances as opposed to being, you know, the team leader for the X-Men, which honestly, she easily could be, and actually has been in regards to multiversal teams that exist. She's played the role of leader before, both with her band and with her fellow mutant heroes, but not for the main X-Men team. No, no, no. Dazzler has powers that have been described before to be potentially unlimited in terms of just how much damage she could do. She can transmute sound into light, and while her light shows in her concerts might seem kinda tame, she has also used her power set to defeat and defend against heavy hitters like Ulysses Claw, who she permanently defeated, Enchantress, and the Hulk. Number 6, Witchfire. I think Witchfire is a super cool hero. She not only looks cool, but she also is a magical hero, one of the most powerful kinds out there, if you ask me. One of them. Not the only one, but definitely one of my tops. But still, among those who are gifted with magic, Witchfire's Rebecca Carstairs usually ends up being regarded as lower on the totem pole. I'm sure there are actually many of you out there who aren't even familiar with this character. And to show how tragically weak she is, shortly after her first appearance in the Prime Earth continuity, she's permanently defeated, with her soul ending up being trapped after the complete destruction of her physical body. Pretty tragic, really, because I just feel like she's so cool. How could you do her like that? Number 5, Cypher. Cypher I'd like to rank a little bit lower on this list because calling him weak feels kind of unfair, considering how integral he's been lately in regards to helping kickstart Krakoa, especially in the comics. But Cypher is still one of those characters that people attribute as being weak because of his power set, and so for that reason, I'm still gonna count him here. But of course, his powers actually happen to be some of the most useful in the comics. It's kind of like a misunderstanding, especially when we consider that they also apply to Cypher being able to communicate with tech and using his ability to understand and communicate in all kinds of languages to become a skilled fighter, which has been interpreted by certain writers as its own language, so Cypher can also be great at fighting. However, not all writers seem to be able to agree on this point, because some people have also seemingly forgot that Cypher is supposed to be really great at fighting. Number 4, Tracy 13. Tracy 13 is a magic user who isn't as well known as others like Zatanna, John Constantine, or Dr. Fate from DC Comics. And in that regard, considering she hasn't had as much of a chance to prove herself, she could be considered weak. That being said, she still is a magic user and one who is the daughter of both a magical skeptic and a powerful sorceress, meaning that she possesses both the knowledge of when to be doubtful about someone's prowess and skills and the natural aptitude to perform magic herself, learning from her mother before her mother passed away. In the Prime Earth continuity, the type of magic that Tracy uses is actually known as urban magic, which allows her to fuel her abilities through the power and spirit of sprawling and built-up cities. Personally, I also think that's just like a super cool, like niche magic thing, urban magic. Number 3, Dupe. Unsurprisingly, yes, a lot of seemingly weak heroes who actually happen to have pretty impressive powers come from the mutant camp of Marvel Comics. Although I don't know if it's ever actually been cemented exactly what Dupe is at all, whether that be mutant or something else entirely. Maybe an alien, who knows. However, Dupe has definitely found a home with the mutants, so I think we'd still consider him to be an honorary mutant at the very least if we wanted. Dupe has to be one of the weirdest characters of all time, especially when it comes to his storylines. Dupe is also weirdly romantic for a floating green alien language speaking creature that was possibly created as a result of government experimentation. Kinda looks like a jelly bean. Yet also somehow he has a mother. Dupe is a ridiculous character, but when he needs to, he seems to be able to exhibit almost any superpower one could think of. Number 2, Booster Gold. Booster Gold could be considered weak because his powers aren't even really powers that he was born with or incurred from a wacky lab accident gone wrong, or like worked really hard to earn like abilities, but instead are fueled by technology that he stole in the future, which is where, or rather when, he's from. The future. He used tech to travel to the past and with his knowledge of the past as well, aimed to become a hero in that time period. There, Booster used his tech as well as his knowledge from the future to try and become a hero. And well, he succeeded! Hooray! However, just because Booster can do things like time travel doesn't mean he's always the best at heroics. Case in point, the time he tried to give a gift to Batman and Catwoman in honor of their wedding. His gift was to travel back in time and prevent Bruce's parents from being lost to him all those years ago. But in so doing, this also prevented Bruce and Selena from ever getting together and also caused, well, a lot of other problems. I mean, Batman wouldn't be Batman without that loss, right? Potentially. Yes, actually, I think that story confirmed that. Number 1, Squirrel Girl. Squirrel Girl is one of my all-time favorite heroes, even if some out there consider her to be weak sauce. Not me though, I see her true strength, but I can't ignore the fact that on paper, her powers, her mutation, well, it all does sound pretty ridiculous. And she should, by all intents and purposes, not be as OP as we know her to be. However, that being said, I feel like we need to acknowledge the fact that Doreen's abilities, or more specifically, her people skills, are honestly insanely powerful. Squirrel Girl has the ability to befriend pretty much anyone, no matter their alignment. And she is really, and I mean really, good at helping convince criminals to call it quits, either for the day or honestly, for like the rest of their entire lives. Number 10, Victor Zsasz. Victor Zsasz is literally just a dude with a knife and a penchant for taking lives. Granted, I'm sure he's pretty strong. I've seen him drawn as such at least, with at times his muscles being made to look like they have muscles. But then again, he's also been drawn as having a kind of wiry frame as well. In fact, I'd even go so far to say as his wiry frame is more the status quo than his like super jacked version. Zsasz doesn't actually have any powers to speak of, but he does have an obsession for taking lives that often makes him one of the most dangerous foes around. He's relentless, and that's what you need to watch out for. Zsasz won't stop until he gets what he wants, and is also even able to ignore injuries he sustains whilst fighting to claim a life. Basically, he's just like insane. So you don't want to fight him. But also, he's just a dude. And friends, before I move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button. Number 9, Kraven. When you think about it, Kraven is kinda just a guy who's really good at hunting. But that's kind of about it. I mean, he does have some augmentations thanks to a magic potion that he drank, but he's ultimately just a man. In the end, Kraven actually did end up perishing too, so the version of him that we have in the comics now isn't even really the original version of Kraven. He's actually a clone of Kraven who was introduced as basically one of his pseudo-sons. This version of Kraven would end up taking his father's place. I think one of the most powerful abilities or powers that Kraven has is the ability in this way to kind of not die. Even the original Kraven did perish earlier on and was resurrected, and when he passed away more permanently, he lived on with his clone, Kraven 2. The last son of Kraven, which is also like really weird that he had a bunch of clones considering he actually does have sons. I'd be insulted if I was a son. Number 8, Golden Glider. Golden Glider is Lisa Snart, sister to Captain Cold's Leonard Snart and longtime girlfriend of another fellow Rogues member, Mirror Master. Golden Glider is a pretty cool and underrated character, I think. She never wanted superpowers in the Prime Earth continuity version of her story, but you know, she got them anyway. This happened when the Rogues attempted to merge their weapons with their DNA to grant them actual superpowers. Normally they just have weapons. The device they were using exploded and Lisa was caught in the crossfire, leaving her physical body comatose but granting her astral projection powers, which she could use to phase and turn invisible. Number 7, Bullseye. Bullseye isn't necessarily known for his amazing strength or anything like that. For all intents and purposes, he's pretty much just a dude with a reinforced skeleton, thanks to him receiving an adamantium upgrade back in the day. At least that used to be the canon explanation for how he became so durable. However, he is probably one of the most skilled marksmen in the world. In fact, I'd even argue that he's a better marksman than Hawkeye is. Bullseye is the villain primarily of Daredevil, but he's also fought against other heroes before, and honestly, every time he fights a hero, for the most part, he seems to fare pretty well. And even when he fights other villains too, I'd say. This is the man who was made famous for taking Electro away from Matt Murdock and brutally defeating her. And I mean brutally. This is especially impressive when you consider how deadly Electra alone is. The fact that he was able to take her out is honestly pretty astonishing. Number 6, Mirror Master. For a Flash villain, Mirror Master is not necessarily fast on his feet, but he does have speed in another sense. Mirror Master brings with him his mirror gun and mirror technology. This tech allows him to travel to alternate dimensions and teleport. Teleportation is kind of like super speed, but holds back any of the excuses needed to protect you or whoever you happen to be saving or running with from burning up, which is something you have to have when you're a speedster. You gotta have those excuses, otherwise it's not gonna be pretty when you're running with people. Mirror Master for this reason might not be winning any foot races against any of the heroes, the Flashes, but as long as he's got his mirrors, he can definitely still beat them to the finish line, and even beat them to the finish line across multiversal realities. So just because his powers, if we're talking Prime Earth, or abilities, if we're talking New Earth, are tied to mirrors, doesn't mean that you should underestimate him. Number 5, Arcade. Who is Arcade, and what makes him so seemingly great and dangerous? And does he own an arcade? No, not really. But what does make him great and dangerous is probably his creativity, and his genius intellect. Arcade doesn't have any powers of his own, but instead crafts death traps in a place that he calls Murder World, typically a place that he builds with his own resources and his own manipulations. He does this by holding hostage people that his employees, or his victims, who are kind of one and the same sometimes to be honest, care the most about in order to make them play his games, or help him run the games, if they're working for him. And while he might seem ridiculous and look kind of atypical for what you'd imagine a master villain to look like, especially a terrifying one, that bow tie though, he ultimately is very good at putting people in terrifying positions that will even make you, as the reader, squirm at times reading about them. I know I do sometimes when I'm reading Arcade. Oh, He's kind of creepy. Number 4, Killer Moth. Killer Moth never comes out on top, which is why a lot of people consider him to be a weaker villain in the DC canon. But at the same time, he should actually be capable of so much more, which is why I included him here on this list. And there have been a few times that he's proven that he could do more. Killer Moth shares similarities with the esteemed and accomplished hero Batman. Both are fans of using gadgets to enhance their fighting prowess and make up for areas where they otherwise might lack, due to basically neither of them having superpowers. The problem with Killer Moth is simply that he doesn't understand how to best utilize his gadgets and equipment, which is why he is usually very quickly defeated as opposed to becoming a serious threat. Number 3, Weasel. Weasel is Jack Hammer, once the ally of Deadpool turned villain against him. His abilities had more to do with getting weapons and getting them into the hands of certain people who needed them. He was basically a glorified arms dealer when we first got to know him, helping to outfit Wade. Eventually, Weasel saw the people he was allied with as his enemies and decided to turn on them, becoming known later as Patient Zero, an alias he took up. He was a pretty ruthless villain, but at the same time, he isn't actually known for having any specifically inherent powers. Even when he was powered, I would say that was not really what made him so dangerous. What makes him so dangerous is his ability to manipulate situations and, with his genius intellect, turn people against one another. Despite the fact that Deadpool did his best to save Weasel before he ended up perishing when the Assassin's Guild was looking for him, Weasel still blames Deadpool for everything that had gone wrong in his life, including his recent death and his return to hell. It was then that Weasel was able to make a deal with Mephisto that if he could get Deadpool to be his personal assassin, that he would be able to return to life. Being as wily as Weasel is, he was able to negotiate this into happening, which makes him a pretty dangerous villain for someone who doesn't actually have any superpowers currently to speak of. Number 2, Punchline. Punchline isn't super weak, but she is super new, having only been around for a few years in the comics, and so because of this, many people see her as a weaker villain, being a new kid on the block. You know, she hasn't really earned her stripes yet. But at the same time, she shows great potential. One of the things that I think is so impressive about her is how straight up ruthless she seems, preferring to prioritize her own bigger picture over anyone else that she might be working with or working for. That, and she's already shown great aptitude for chemistry and poison/toxin making. Number 1, Bob. Weirdly, but also I guess kinda unweirdly, Bob, who is the initial reluctant ally of Deadpool, ends up also becoming one of his villains. Not his greatest villain or anything, and not like a big villain that we all talk about, but definitely, I would say at one point, one of his villains. But while Bob has a long list of weaknesses, he also used to work for Hydra, so he may have some knowledge of Hydra that could be useful. And while his plans don't usually go to plan, he does have some pretty decent ones. Enter his plan to send an alternate version of Deadpool, known as Hulkpool, back in time to kill Deadpool. I mean, he sent him to the wrong timeline, but still, that's a pretty cool plan. And the fact that he had access to a time platform to enact this plan was pretty impressive, honestly, especially for Bob. Granted, this plan did not work, so he still remains probably the weakest villain on this list, hence why I'm putting him at our top spot, but also still has the potential at least to be an epic villain at some point in the future. I certainly would love to see it. I don't think anyone would be expecting it if Bob was like master villain all of a sudden. Number 10, Resurrection. While not always influenced by Madelyne and her own abilities, Maddie not only has a powerful healing factor, but she seems to have found herself in a constant cycle of resurrection. Meaning that even when she seems to be dead and gone and we haven't seen her for honestly years, she's the kind of villain, and honestly not even just a villain now, also just as a character, that always comes back. Madelyne has been defeated multiple times and has returned since her initial introduction and defeat in Inferno more than 5 times over the course of her 40-year history. Now that is quite a lot of returns, and also quite a lot of disappearances, honestly. One thing is for sure, if Maddie is killed or seemingly permanently defeated or disposed of in some way, she always comes back. Eventually anyways. Might take a few years, but she'll be back. And friends, before I move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button. Number 9, Phoenix Force. The Phoenix Force is literally a part of Madelyne Prior. No, seriously, she wouldn't exist without it. While some might argue that Madelyne Prior is a weaker version of Jean Grey, those folks likely don't understand her origin. At least her retcon origin. Not the origin Chris Claremont originally intended for her, but the one we got. Jean has been connected to the Phoenix Force before, being its host, but Maddie is literally made from a piece of the Phoenix, with a piece of it residing inside her. So she doesn't need to be a host of the Force to tap into its raw power and energy. The Phoenix Force is one of the most powerful forces in all of the known universe and potentially even the multiverse over at Marvel, considering it has the ability to literally rewrite reality. Because Maddie was literally made from it, this also means its potential lives inside her as well. Maddie did not know her origin and initially lived appearing as a normal human. It wasn't until she learned the truth of her origin, her retconned origin admittedly, that she began to be able to tap into her true mutant and even cosmic power. Number 8. Psychic Link. Madelyne Prior has the ability to link her mind to another being. We see her doing this during the initial Inferno event and, honestly, is pretty scary. It is in doing this that she almost completely destroys and defeats Jean Grey during their fight against one another. I can't even imagine having my mind psychically linked to someone, especially not someone who looks identical to me and seemingly kind of stole my life. I mean, whichever way you want to look at that, either from Jean's perspective or Maddie's perspective, they could definitely both share that perspective when looking at the other of someone stealing someone's life. Initially, the two women shared a psychic link, one that Madelyne later exploits during Inferno in an attempt to kill Jean, although of course through harming herself. Madelyne's plan at that point is to basically take her own life, thereby destroying Jean through their link, thereby taking Jean down along with her. If I'm going down, you're coming with me, and I'll go down if it means I can defeat you. Number 7. Lives on in Jean. I think one of the most wild powers that Maddie has in the comics that we tend to overlook is her influence over Jean. Now, following the events of Inferno, Madelyne's personality and memories basically lived on in Jean Grey. Jean was forced to take both Maddie's psyche and the Phoenix Force within herself in order to survive Maddie's psychic attack on her soul. This actually gives Madelyne some power through Jean though. It's actually through Madelyne's influence that Jean and the X-Men decided to fatally attack Mr. Sinister, seemingly destroying him permanently after Inferno. Although of course in reality he would return, because that's comics for you. Normally such use of lethal force would not be the X-Men or Jean's way, but it was Maddie's influence that actually prompted them to act as such. While it's not a power that Maddie can easily control or flex necessarily, it's still pretty impressive to think that technically Sinister initially being permanently defeated was in good part because of Maddie's influence on and manipulation of the hero's psyches. Number 6. Take your memories. At one point, Madelyne Prior attempts to take all of Jean's memories, and even threatens to do so. During the Dark Web event, she actually worked with Chasm, the current evil persona of Ben Reilly, who had worked on a device that would forcefully take someone's memories from them. Ben was doing this to basically get the memories that he lost back during the Beyond event, aiming to get them back from Peter Parker's Spider-Man, since Ben's early memories were initially copied from Peter's mind when Ben was created. Without them, there was a big hole in his mind and his personality, a chasm, if you will. Huh? Get it? Teaming up with Ben, Maddie sought to retrieve memories of raising her baby, who would eventually grow up through time to become Cable from Jean. She felt that she was basically robbed of these memories after she was defeated in the initial Inferno event, with Jean taking over her role as baby Cable's mom. However, in the end, Maddie didn't have to forcibly take Jean's memories at all, as instead Jean chose to willingly share them with Madelyne, having never wanted to fight her in the first place. However, it was still a power that Madelyne has, and she could have used it, but she didn't. Number 5. Control over demons. Madelyne Prior isn't just known as Madelyne Prior. In the comics, she also has another name, the Goblin Queen. In fact, when I was recently cosplaying Maddie at SDCC this year, most people referred to me by that name. They call me the Goblin Queen. Most people knew me either as Jean's evil clone or just the Goblin Queen. Maddie earned this name after she made a pact with the Demon of Limbo, thereby becoming their queen. Although she may have felt pretty in her power at that time, in reality she was still kind of just being manipulated by them somewhat. Still, Maddie did hold some sway over the goblins and demons of Limbo, considering that she was their ally and their partner. And you know, Goblin Queen. But like I said, how much power did she have at that time? I don't think she had a ton, really. Number 4. Her secret name. The really wild thing with Madelyne Prior that still amazes me is her secret name. I'm not talking about her title as the Black Queen or even the Goblin Queen. I'm talking more about the fact that no one really seems to know just how to spell her name. I constantly run into this on the internet, and while it might not seem like a power to some, in the DC universe and other different magically based worlds, it would likely be considered an asset. It would be considered a power because it would protect you. Madelyne Madeleine's name is spelled Madelyne with Prior as Pryor. The fact that so many struggle to spell it or even know it would be seen as an asset in many other magical worlds where there is considered to be power in knowing and having someone's name. Like over at DC Comics, this is why some magic users have actually used alternative names. That way they can keep their real ones a secret, so that way demons can't like get their names and like control them or manipulate them. Constantine initially even tried to do this with Hellblazer, but he became too well known and famous and decided to give up his code name as a kind of take that statement to the magic community as a whole. So that's where that name comes from. Number 3, leave you speechless. As I said earlier, Madelyne Prior isn't just a powerful psychic, she was also crafted from a piece of the Phoenix Force by Mr. Sinister, putting her on the same level, if not above, potentially, someone like Jean Grey. Still, even then, I was pretty shocked when she reappeared in Hellions and used her powers to make Havoc's mouth literally disappear. This could be perceived as an illusion, an illusory power, but the way it was gruesomely portrayed makes me think it was more of like Maddie manipulating and rewriting reality to literally erase Havoc's mouth from his face, which she either did through, you know, maybe Phoenix connections or just through magic. A la Scarlet Witch with Black Bolt in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Pretty spooky stuff. Number 2, rules over Limbo. Recently, in the New Mutants comic, Madelyne Prior once more became the Goblin Queen. But this time, more literally the Goblin Queen. She actually took over ruling Limbo from Magic, and what's even more wild is she didn't seek to conquer Limbo, she didn't take it by force. Instead, Magic decided to give over rulership to Madelyne. Magic had her own reasons, largely to get some distance from something that was literally attached to and represented her childhood trauma, while Madelyne obviously had much to gain from the change in power, chiefly a whole kingdom. However, unlike last time when Madelyne wanted to use the power of Limbo for ill, she was revealed to have actually genuinely turned over a new leaf, it seemed, wanting to keep the demons of Limbo in check. At least, that's how it seemed initially. Her designs ended up being somewhat reimagined, shall we say, for the Dark Web event, as she was more depicted as a villain there who used Limbo's resources and populace to once more invade New York City. But we'll get to that in a second. I mean, that all got resolved now. It's kind of a weird thing though, where they were like, she's good. Just kidding, she's evil again. Just kidding, she's good again. You're like, what's happening here? What are we doing with this character? Number 1, Master Diplomat? Madelyne Prior is perhaps working towards becoming a Master Diplomat and leader. At the end of the Dark Web event, with Maddie once more being reformed and even becoming an ally of the X-Men during the event, fighting alongside them and even getting to call on them to assemble, so nice, she decides to open up her own embassy for Limbo, stationing it in New York City. Maddie does this to bring the darkness into the light, believing the spirits of Limbo have been hidden away for far too long, seeing them as representing her own darkness and basically saying like, we try to like hide our darkness and suppress it and like put it away, but you know what, in order to heal we need to bring it out into the light. She intends to make sure that the beings of Limbo are no longer rejected and in fact are seen and accepted by the world above, and in this case now around them. Which I kind of love, honestly. I think that's beautiful.
At number 10, he's a god. I think this is something that a decent amount of people forget. Thor is literally the god of thunder. Like, yeah, he's a demigod technically, but he's still a freaking god. And this comes with a whole bunch of associated powers. Like Superman toughness, senses, strength, and the fact that he's 1,500 years old. Yeah, that's also a thing. He's normally depicted as being 1,500 and 1,800 years old, which makes me really question the ethics and morals behind Thor and Jane's love triangle thing. Like, at what age does an Asgardian become legal, or is that just like whenever their body decides to grow? Because again, they're gods. As deities, this aspect is inherent to their existence, granting Thor self-sufficiency and rendering him immune to the same necessities for aging as humans. So while Odin serves as an example of aging among gods, Thor is always looking good, so I doubt he'll get old anytime soon. If you're enjoying this video so far, please support us by giving this video a like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. At number 9 is Super Breath. Introduced and seemingly only used in Journey into Mystery number 86 from back in 1962, Thor has the ability to blow really hard. Okay, wait, let me rephrase that. He will blow you to kingdom come. No, that's even worse. There's no good way to say it. Well, what I mean is that Thor's god lungs are so powerful, he could actually cause a hurricane with an exhale. In the comic in question, a villain known as Zarko tries to shoot Thor with a pew-pew that would send him to another dimension, but to stop this from happening, Thor uses his super breath, which is described as a hurricane force, to get out of it. No idea how breath can save you from entering the 4th dimension, but hey, all bets are off with this one because it was only used once, and of course, in the comics. There will never be an explanation that makes sense. At number 8 is super speed. Thor, a deity wielding the mighty Mjolnir, possesses astonishing speeds in his arsenal. He isn't just renowned for his immense strength within the Marvel universe, but also his extraordinary swiftness, surpassing even the speed of light. This remarkable velocity enables Thor to outpace Quicksilver, a prominent speedster among the X-Men, essentially Marvel's answer to Flash. While an exact measurement of Thor's velocity remains elusive, he has indicated that on Earth his speed is supersonic, yet when traveling in space he can circumnavigate the sun and span the universe in mere seconds, feat made possible by Mjolnir's ability to transcend time and space. Indeed, Thor's exploits include even freaking time travel. At number 7 is All-Tongue. Well, this might sound like something you'd see on a Toronto guy's Tinder profile. It isn't exactly what you think. An Asgardian deity responsible for safeguarding the 9 realms, Thor's duty often requires interactions with vastly diverse races, many of which communicate in distinct languages. And although filmmakers tend to simplify matters by having everybody speak English for audience interpretation, the comic version of Thor possesses the remarkable ability to converse fluently in the language of all 9 realms. He can actually choose which language to use during a conversation. This remarkable skill is known as the All-Tongue, a gift that ensures whoever communicates with him will hear his words in their native tongue, allowing for seamless understanding. So basically, Thor can talk in whatever language he wants, and everyone he's talking to is able to understand him. Like a live-in-the-moment translator that actually gets the grammar right instead of just being a literal word-for-word translation. At number 6 is Warrior's Madness. Comic books and movies have depicted numerous instances where heroes find themselves facing superior and overwhelming forces in battles. Tactics they employ to survive against insurmountable odds and achieve victory can be attributed to a range of factors, and among these heroes, Thor stands out as someone who's endowed with such an ability which, if harnessed, has the potential to significantly impact not only his adversaries but also all those close to him. When he's in a pinch, Thor can call upon the Warrior's Madness. The Warrior's Madness, also referred to as Sin Unpardonable, stands as Asgard's most forbidden affliction under Odin's decree. Those afflicted bear the weight of a dire penalty, with only the most solemn sacrifices capable of redemption. This malady grants Thor a tenfold surge in strength and endurance, yet perilously endangers his mental well-being. It manifests through symptoms such as berserker fury, intense migraines, erratic thoughts, savage and animalistic actions, uncontrollable behavior, and irrationality. At number 5 is Earthbending. During the early 2000s, a series of intricate events led to numerous Asgardians becoming trapped within the bodies of ordinary humans. This continued until Thor emerged from his prolonged slumber, breaking the cycle of Ragnarok and establishing a new Asgard above Oklahoma. Thor's return marked a rebirth, unveiling his extraordinary power over Earth itself, elevating him to one of the mightiest Asgardian deities. Embracing his elder god lineage, Thor's abilities expanded beyond mere weather manipulation. He gained dominion over vast chasms spanning continents and trigger earthquakes. In moments requiring more than weaponry and brawn, the creation of chasms to separate Thor from his adversaries proved to be an essential strategy. At number 4 is teleportation. In 2000, Marvel introduced the Ultimate Marvel Universe as a way to refresh long-standing characters with new variations and minor reboots. On Earth 1610, many of Marvel's iconic figures underwent an updated and reimagined depictions, including Thor, who exhibits a distinct divergence. In this rendition, Thor's reliance on Mjolnir for his abilities is diminished, showcasing a more arrogant and resilient warrior. Unlike his traditional counterpart, Thor from 1610's powers are not solely derived from Mjolnir. Rather, they're channeled through the enchanted hammer, resulting in a significant reduction of his power level within the Ultimate Universe. However, this drawback is balanced by his new form ability to teleport through rune magic. Reports suggest that he can traverse vast distances, spanning cosmic expanses and bridging dimensions. Despite these unique traits, the full scope of Thor's capabilities in this universe remains a mystery. At number 3 is Anti-Force. Beyond its association with potent lightning bolts, Mjolnir possesses a versatile range of abilities. Among these, it can harness and manipulate diverse energies, unleashing multitude of formidable blasts. The Anti-Force stands as one of the most formidable, albeit used sparingly, in a weapon of last resort against adversaries who defy conventional defeat. The Anti-Force's immense destructive energies are inherently pervious, capable of obliterating entire planets. Thor can now create, shape, and manipulate anti or negative forces, which work in different ways depending on the force. Anti-gravity, for example, would repel objects instead of retract. Anti-electromagnetism would cause like charges to attract and opposite charges to repel. Anti-friction and anti-velocity would speed up objects or flow instead of resisting them. Anti-strong force would cause nuclei to explore it, and the anti-weak force would cause radioactive growth instead of radioactive decay. Pretty weird. At number 2 is the Odin Force. On various occasions, Thor has been granted the Mighty of Odin Force, an infusion of the cosmic and mystical energies from the realm of Asgard by his father. This divine inheritance amplifies all of his abilities, amalgamating Odin's, Vili's, V's, and his own powers, thus significantly elevating Thor's prowess. Demonstrating this augmented might, Thor managed to fracture Captain America's shield with a single blow, relocated Asgard above New York City's skies, and contained a nuclear missile's explosion. The extent of Thor's achievements while wielding this power was considered just a fraction of its potential, as per the Avatar of Odin Force. As Mjolnir suffered the damage during a confrontation with Bor, Thor sought the assistance of Stephen Strange for its repair, and to mend the hammer, Strange revealed that Thor would need to invest his remaining Odin Force and permanently bind the essence with the hammer. Despite the risk, Thor willingly underwent ancient ritual performed by Doctor Strange, channeling the Odin Force back into Mjolnir and restoring its integrity. Becoming the Allfather of Asgard after the War of the Realms, Thor once again bequeathed the mighty Odin Force, with Odin's ultimate sacrifice granting him access to its full potential. At number 1 is the Celestial Chef. Jarnbjorn, a dwarven forged battle axe crafted from its guardian steel for Runa, an original Valkyrie member, became significant as she vanished, absorbed by the headless Celestial. Stored in Asgard's arsenal, the weapon was later wielded by Thor before he possessed Mjolnir. In the 9th century, struggling to lift Mjolnir, Thor utilized Jarnbjorn as his primary tool against various earthbound adversaries such as frost giants, trolls, and dragons. During the 11th century, Thor empowered the axe with his blood to permeate celestial armor, confronting Apocalypse. However, Thor eventually lost Jarnbjorn, which was later claimed by Kang the Conqueror from Baron Mordo's tomb. The Apocalypse twins, Uriel and Eamon, took the axe from Kang and employed it to slay a celestial gardener, becoming the new Apocalypse and orchestrating a plot to incriminate Earth for its demise. The twins manipulated Scarlet Witch to save mutants while humanity faced destruction, leading to the transportation of all mutants to their Ark, leaving Earth and its inhabitants behind.